Let's go live button. So let's wait for the stream to fire up all across the internet, and then we're going to go ahead and get started. We always have to wait just a couple little seconds, a little minute maybe, for YouTube to get alive and well, but it looks like we're ready to rock and roll. So let's get started. Hello, my friends, and welcome back to yet another episode of Watching the Watchers Live. My name is Robert Gruler. I am a criminal defense attorney here at the R&R Law Group in the always beautiful and sunny Scottsdale, Arizona, where my team and I, over the course of many years, have represented thousands of good people facing criminal charges. And throughout our time in practice, we have seen a lot of problems with our justice system. I'm talking about misconduct involving the police. We have prosecutors behaving poorly. We have judges not particularly interested in a little thing called justice. And it all starts with the politicians, the people at the top, the ones who write the rules and pass the laws that they expect you and me to follow, but sometimes have a little bit of difficulty doing so themselves. That's why we started this show called Watching the Watchers, so that together with your help, we can shine that big, beautiful spotlight of accountability and transparency down upon our system with the hope of finding justice. And we're grateful that you are here and with us today because we've got a lot to get into. We're going to be talking about the Biden administration. We've been spending some time on them for a couple days here, but we've got a new report that we have to sink our teeth into. We're talking about a 32-page plan that is addressing domestic extremism. We've been talking a lot about that here. We already have a criminal justice system that is well in effect, that is resulting in a lot of justice problems throughout this country. And now what it sounds like is the Biden administration wants to sort of create this new bucket of domestic extremists. And they've got a 32-page report that we're going to go through today to see what that looks like, because it sort of makes me a little bit concerned. We already have a criminal justice system. We know what happened the last time we went after terrorists, at least as it relates to civil liberties. And so now we're talking about bringing all of that war on terror garbage right back to our doorstep. So very curious and concerned about this. We're going to go through it. Then we're going to talk about what's happening with some Popo going on around the world. We've got to take a look at what's happening out of Maryland. There was a tasing that took place, and a young 17-year-old man was sort of tased in the stomach. This video went viral. Several officers were around the scene, and so we want to go through that story. We also have an update out of Savannah, Georgia, because 5 different police officers were all fired. Very interesting story. There was a gentleman by the name of William Zachary Harvey, age 60, died in police custody, actually died by hanging, and some bad things happened with those police. So we're going to talk about what's going on there. And then lastly, to wrap up the program, we've got a little bit of an update on some critical race theory conversation that we got to dive into, because the Virginia Democratic gubernatorial candidate goes by the name of Terry McAuliffe. If you've been following politics for some time, you probably heard this name, one of those guys who was sort of in the inner circle of the Hillary Clinton and the Bill Clinton camp. And so he is running for governor out of Virginia, and he came out and said that critical race theory was a conspiracy, which is par for the course, because everything else that we've been talking about on this channel at one point or the other has been labeled a conspiracy theory at some point. So very, very fitting that Terry McAuliffe would now just lump critical race theory into that bucket as well. Kind of like anything that you disagree with just happens to be a conspiracy. Notice that little trend. But lo and behold, there is some progress that's being made in critical race theory. We've got a representative by the name of Ken Buck from Colorado. Sounds like he's going to be joining Tommy Tuberville from Alabama to try to prohibit federal funds for being used for the 1619 Project and some other things. So we have a lot to get into, as you can tell. And if you want to be a part of the show, if you want to participate in it, you can do so by going over to watchingthewatchers.locals.com, which is where we take questions from you, the audience. We are going to go through different sections here in the show today, and at the end, we'll take questions, comments, feedback, criticism, anything else you want to sort of throw out there. We'll be taking your questions over from watchingthewatchers.locals.com. So I'd invite you to go check that out. There are also a bunch of other links down in the description below that we would encourage you to check out, like our law firm's YouTube channel, my crypto YouTube channel. I'm on Gumroad now. I've got some courses that are available for you, and I would encourage you to check all of that stuff out and continue to support the show. We very much appreciate it. All right, so let's get into the news of the day. Domestic extremism. This has been a topic we've been spending a lot of time on this channel talking about, and it is now back in the form of a blueprint, because the Biden administration is going to be addressing this catastrophic problem, as they're calling it. So we want to go through what is happening here. And the reason why I'm concerned about this a little bit is because we've talked about extremism before in this country. We've talked about terrorism before. And so we're going to see a lot of this same type of language that is all being sort of wrapped into this label of domestic extremism. And my concern here is that anytime you start to do this, what you're doing is you're sort of making it difficult to tease out the meatballs from the meat sauce a little bit. It's hard to pull them apart, because what we're saying is we have this one big bucket of domestic extremism. And now my concern is that anybody can fall into that bucket for anything that the government just deems to be appropriate, which is certainly concerning. So what I want to do today is, of course, I want to frame this out, right? I am a defense lawyer. I've got a lot of concerns about our current justice system and how we enforce criminal laws in this country as is. I think largely the rest of the country also has concerns about this, because we just spent all of the summer of 2020 talking about George Floyd, the summer of unrest, all of the riots, Antifa, BLM, the list goes on and on. Criminal justice in this country has been on the ropes for some time. I know, I've been practicing here for a little bit. So it is something that is, in my opinion, is ripe for a lot of improvement, a lot of reform, and I think most of the country agrees with me. Now, if we start sort of layering on some additional criminal statutes, that might be problematic. If we're going to start categorizing and creating new buckets of crimes for all these different permutations of whatever the government, as we're going to read through, defines domestic extremism to be, now we may be talking about a whole sort of separate statutory framework, a whole new area of law for domestic extremism. And I've got a lot of problems with that, because our current justice system isn't all that great. We've got some problems with it. Some of it works, some of it doesn't. But as we can tell from the country, from sort of the political tumult that we have seen over this last year, there is some room for improvement. So I have concerns about slapping on a whole new framework of domestic extremism laws. That being said, I am not somebody who wants to live in a society where there's domestic extremism going on, whatever, we agree upon that definition to be, which I think is going to be pretty far off from one another. We're going to start to hear from the government that if you are sort of, anti-government, like if you're a small government person, if you think that maybe we shouldn't just accept whatever our lord bureaucrats tell us as at face value, if you sort of question what they're doing, does that put you into that bucket? Yes or no? Does that make you a domestic extremist? Well, I don't know. And so we're going to have to define what these are, because I'm going to guess, just like our current laws, a lot of innocent people are going to be swept up in these things. It's a violation of civil liberties. It's a violation of our constitutional rights, and I got a big problem with it. That being said, I don't want to live in a world where there is domestic extremism, right? I don't want to be somebody who's walking down the street and have to worry about some sort of, bomb going off or some sort of, shooting happening. We all want to live in a peaceful society, whether you're Democratic or Republican. I think that most people agree on that. We all want a peaceful, nonviolent, workable society. And so when we start talking about combating, domestic extremism, I think it's okay to approach it by saying, well, let's see what their offer is. Are they going to give us some hard, concrete data? Are they going to tell us why this is such a problem, right? We hear a lot from our politicians about all the problems. We have a laundry list that we're going to go through here about everybody that's responsible for the ills of society, because that's what politicians do. They just sort of identify problems, they get on stage and they make a big show about it, and then they start, throwing money around to try to solve these things. So let's start from the basis here, the framework that, nobody wants domestic extremism, and maybe Biden's got something to offer us here for what they're going to be doing. So we're going to start there. We're going to go back to the New York Times. This is published today, June 15th, by Zolan Kano Youngs. He says the Biden administration forms a blueprint to combat domestic extremism. Let me turn that on over here. Here it says the Biden administration is aiming to bolster, what are we going to be talking about? Information sharing with technology companies, expand the hiring of intelligence analysts, and improve the screening of government employees for ties to domestic extremism, right? So they're going to be checking their employees about this, according to the New York Times. We've already seen this. They're doing this with the military. We saw, I think it was Lloyd Austin, the Secretary of Defense, who was sort of hinting this way. This all was stemming from January 6th, right? We talked about that here, that once that happened, we knew that this was just going to be sort of opening the can of worms. It's going to be a lot of enforcement, a lot of criminal prosecutions taking place, and now they're going back and actually investigating their own government employees. We saw this during the inauguration, right? They thought that the National Guard people may have been a bunch of Trumpers, so we got to make sure that they were all identified and theoretically excommunicated. So we know that's going on. Now, Biden ordered a review. Right, there it is. Biden ordered a review of how what the heck is going on over here? All right, we got it together here, folks. Biden ordered a review of how federal agencies address domestic extremism soon after coming into office, part of an effort to more aggressively acknowledge that there was a threat. This is a 32-page plan that has steps that have been recommended by national security officials. They're talking about bolstering relationships with who? Social media companies, so that they can just skim more of your data off there and identify you as a threat for whatever reason. If Zuckerberg says so, then I guess you are. Improving information sharing amongst law enforcement agencies into one blueprint. Okay, so they're going to identify extremists in the country. Now, this is according to the New York Times. So we're going to dive into the article itself, and we're going to see what this means. Who are they talking about? We keep hearing about extremists, right? I'm tired of this word. I've been hearing this for a long time. Domestic violent extremists. We even heard John Brennan, former CIA guy, said that, libertarians belong in that category, which I take offense to. So let's take a look here. Now, if we rewind the clock a little bit, okay, so this is from June 15th. We already went through this article. Let's look back here on March 17th. Okay, this is what they were saying. Different author over here from the New York Times, but this was also updated on June 15th. So the New York Times says, a new report warns of the rising threat of domestic terrorism. Okay, so now we're sort of seeing some modification of language. Domestic extremism now is the current version, but back on March 17th, there was a new report about domestic terrorism. So what are we talking about there, right? Are we talking about Al-Qaeda? Are we talking about ISIS? Are we talking about foreign terrorists? Or are these domestic terrorists, right? Like the word here in front of terrorism says domestic, okay? So domestic terrorism sort of morphing into domestic extremism because probably somebody didn't like the terrorism word. So Biden requested that the intelligence community complete an assessment shortly after taking office. He made fighting domestic terrorism a priority. And again, who are we talking about? He is specifically referencing here that the new intelligence report that was delivered to Congress is talking about militias and white supremacists, okay, adding urgency to a call for more resources. So I want to get into this, right? Who are these militias? Who are these white supremacists? Because we keep hearing these words a lot, and they're all being passed around a little bit. I remember hearing that the white supremacists were the Proud Boys. Remember this? And the Proud Boys were being led at the time by a guy named Enrique Tarrio, who did not happen to be a white guy. So my question back then was, how are the Proud Boys white supremacists if the leader of whatever chapter that was is not even a white person? Sounds like a pretty ineffective white supremacy organization if they're electing as the president somebody who is not white, right? It is such an overgeneralization, and I don't like where this is going. I think it's quite dangerous when you just start calling everybody and anybody a militia or a white supremacist based on whatever your definition is that nobody knows, right? It's a pretty powerful tool because it's an awful label to start throwing around so haphazardly. So if they're going to use this definition, if they're going to say militia and white supremacists, well, I want to know what those mean, and I want to know what groups they're specifically talking about. Because quite frankly, I've been labeled as a Nazi or something like that by some lunatic website. Anyways, the point here is, in particular, they're talking about the intelligence assessment highlighted the threat from militias. Okay, so again, what militias? Predicting that it would be elevated in the coming months. Again, this is back in March. So if it's going to be elevated, intelligence community, tell us what's going on. They're talking about contentious social political factors. Racially motivated violent extremists, such as white supremacists, were the most likely to conduct mass casualty attacks against civilians, while militias, they're defining, typically targeted law enforcement and government personnel and facilities. Right? So this report back in March says over the next little bit here, we may be seeing a problem. Right? It's a coming threat, they're saying. Elevated in the coming months is the language. Well, in the coming month, have we seen it, right? March, April, May, June. We're in June now. All right. So we haven't seen any mass casualty attacks. I mean, when I think mass casualty, I think of a big number of people. The last time we talked about this story, right? People sent me emails. Hey, this was 3 people were shot over here, 2 people were shot over here. I understand that, right? I want to distinguish here between shootings, which should be covered between our regular criminal law, and something that's a more existential threat. Something like a militia, okay, that we haven't seen before. Has the United States government battled a militia, outside of what maybe they claimed happened in Waco, or what they're saying, occurred in, how about the Civil War, right? We were dealing with that. Now, there are militia groups, that there are little, spats with law enforcement. There are those stories, but I'm talking about domestic terrorism, right? I'm talking about something that is elevating to that level. on the scale of terrorism the way that we think about it. We're going to see in the report, when we get to the Biden report, that they talk about the Oklahoma City bombing. Okay, to me, that is a mass casualty event. A shooting at a nightclub somewhere where somebody drives by and shoots off. Awful thing, horrendous, but that resembles more of regular crime rather than some sort of white supremacy, overarching militia that justifies the response that preempts a 32-page report from our Justice Department battling a nationwide problem and a rising threat throughout the nation. So is that happening, yes or no? Let's go back to the first article that is detailing what is happening in this 32-page report. So the new strategy that the Biden administration is talking about was widely expected to detail a position on whether the government should establish a domestic terrorism law. See, this is what I'm talking about. This is not just like, oh, we're going to, sort of focus on making sure that we're doing our jobs well. It's not a little pep talk, little rally. Hey, go out there, Justice Department, and enact justice. No, they're talking about new laws, new bureaucracies that they're going to layer on top of all of us, and we're going to have to deal with it for the foreseeable future. So they're talking about, what should we do? Should we establish a law that prosecutors can use to investigate and charge homegrown extremists? Instead of, relying on the current criminal code like assault, murder, hate crime charges, the strategy instead indicates that the administration is now focused on bolstering methods of combating extremism already being used by the government. Okay, despite Mr. Biden calling for such a law during the presidential campaign. So we have a little bit of a conflict here, right? Biden was calling for something like that, but now the current Justice Department probably reviewed the Constitution and said, yeah, that's not a good idea there, sir. Can't do that. Well, there is increasing bipartisan support to equip prosecutors with more laws to crack down on extremists. Civil rights advocates have expressed concern that new statutes would lead to government overreach and infringements on privacy rights. The administration referred the issue to the Justice Department for further review, according to the planning document. So they're going to continue to look. The Justice Department is going to do a deep inquiry, and they're going to determine just how far they can, in fact, overreach and how heavily they can infringe on your privacy rights. So I'm looking forward to see what that memo looks like. We also are going to wrap up this article before we go back to the FBI and get their characterization. But they say other efforts to investigate extremism, including a commission to examine the attack, have been stymied by Republicans and pro-Trump mobs. The assessment being released on Tuesday lists attacks that were perpetrated. We're going to read through those. We've got 5 police officer shootings in Dallas. We've got a shooting on the congressional baseball game. We have a siege on Congress. These are all sort of the examples that they are giving for us, so keep that in mind, right? 5 officers shot in Dallas. I remember that one. The shooting at the congressional baseball game. I remember that one. We've got shootings at churches. We've got the siege on Congress. So we have 5 officers shot in Dallas. I'm not sure how many died there. Baseball game was sort of, they framed that as that lone gunman, Bernie supporter who went out there and I think shot one congressperson who didn't die. Then we had the siege on Congress, which one officer died by suicide. Another officer died, presumably by natural causes. And the other 3 casualties were by the people who were a part of the mob there. So, okay. But the strategy was also the latest in a series of assessments that by Mr. Biden labeling white supremacist and militia groups the most lethal threats among domestic terrorists, extremists, okay? The danger from such groups has not subsided, according to this document. So I want to just pin this for us here. The strategy was also the latest in a series of assessments issued by Mr. Biden labeling, all right, white supremacists and militia groups the most lethal threats among domestic extremists. Okay, so what we're going to do as we go through this is we're going to identify all these different extremists. We're going to read through this. I've already read through a lot of this, and so I've been sort of characterizing and putting the different extremist groups into different buckets, right? And we're gonna go through that here. But as we read through, I want to just sort of review how our different law enforcement agencies are categorizing these things, so that we're sort of mirroring what they're doing. If we're going to be labeling these things, I want to make sure we're sort of matching their language. So back some time ago on not that long ago, June 14th, yesterday, the FBI actually just released new information. They unclassified this FBI threat assessment that they passed over to Congress. It's now public, so we can read through this. We can see what the FBI was telling Congress about these domestic extremists, because of course, the FBI now is being run by Christopher Wray, and it's under the administration being housed by Biden. And so the FBI is sort of the chief law enforcement arm of the federal government. and we got to be careful. We got to see what they're doing. They're going to be on the front lines making these arrests, doing these investigations. So let's see what they're warning about. Over from CNN, this was posted yesterday. Says the FBI is warning lawmakers that QAnon conspiracy theorists may become more violent. QAnon? All right, so I guess they're still around. Thought all that kind of got forgotten about when Trump is not president anymore, but I guess that's still going on. So now it says the FBI has warned lawmakers that online QAnon conspiracy theorists may carry out more acts of violence, right? May carry out, serving as digital soldiers to take action in the world following January 6th. The shift is being fueled by conspiracies, of course, more militant followers. They say they can no longer, quote, trust the plan that was being set forth by Q, according to an unclassified FBI threat assessment. This was sent out to lawmakers last week. CNN just got a copy of this. So this is actually kind of interesting. The FBI Bureau of Investigation, of course, unclassified document. This was sent out, sounds like, on June 4th. The adherence to the QAnon conspiracy theory by some domestic violent extremists. So we have another version of this. We've talked about this one a lot. This was the first version that the Biden administration came out with. They call them DVEs, which is one that I've been sort of using in my notes and in my thinking about it. Domestic violent extremists. And I always thought this was clever because they're sort of piggybacking off of the domestic violence stuff, right? Everybody's already familiar with domestic violence. You already know what that is. And so you just add on extremists there and you sort of take a persuasive term, right? Nobody likes domestic violence. We all know that, right? It's sort of what you see, domestic violence is shelters and all sorts of stuff. So we're all familiar with that term. You just add on extremists and it already takes something that has a very negative connotation, rightfully so, and makes it worse by talking about extremists. So the FBI is still using that term. Now the Biden administration are now calling them domestic extremists, but we also had domestic terrorism. It's hard. That's what I'm saying, folks. It's hard to keep track of all this. So let's see what's going on here. The information in this product is provided for informational purposes only, according to the FBI. Generating, accessing, discussing, or otherwise interacting with QAnon-related content without engaging in violence is legal and protected by the First Amendment. FBI does not collect or do anything to, monitor First Amendment protected activities. Thank you. The part which you can take that with a grain of salt. Ask Snowden and Assange what they think about that. The participation of some domestic violent extremists, these DVEs, who are also self-identified as QAnoners. They were participating in the siege on January 6th. It underscores how the current environment is likely and will continue to act as a catalyst for some to begin accepting the legitimacy of violent action, right? QAnon, they say, refers to a complex, constantly evolving conspiracy theory that's being promoted through a decentralized group. They talk about Satan-worshiping international child sex trafficking rings. They talk about plots engaged against the former president, Trump. These alleged crimes by members of the cabal will allegedly be punished by their mass military detention in Guantanamo Bay. QAnon narratives are constantly expanding to include false information, things like 5G technology and some other stuff, right? And there's been no question that there's been some goofy stuff from some of the QAnoners. I've followed some of it on Twitter, and even after a lot of our election coverage, where we went through date by date all of the rules in the Constitution and all of the parliamentarian rules from the Senate and the opening of the electoral votes and all of that, we're still seeing a big contingent of people out there saying, yeah, but still, something could happen. And I always thought that was a little bit out there. But does that make them extremists? Does that make them domestic extremists because they have a particular belief? There's a lot of people who believe a lot of wacky things. A lot of people were believing that Dr. Fauci was telling them the truth for a long time in this country. And we all know that wasn't the case. So now it's sort of, people are free to believe whatever they want to believe. If they want to believe in conspiracy theories, that the earth is flat, that nobody ever went to the moon, that JFK is still alive, that Epstein didn't kill himself, whatever. The list goes on and on. You are free to believe that in this country, and you can believe it as hard as you want to. That's okay. Now, so the question then it becomes, are they now policing thoughts? Are they policing what's happening in your mind because they don't like your political ideology or that bucket of people that you seem to be hanging out with? The FBI now, they have arrested, they say, more than 20 self-identified QAnon adherents who participated in the January 6th violent lawful entry of the Capitol, right? So I've been saying they are going to piggyback on that January 6th thing for the next 20 years. These individuals were charged with violent entry and disorderly conduct, right? Now, they're talking about court documentation, public statements, social media posts. According to press reports based publicly on social media posts, a woman who was fatally shot talking about Ashley Babbitt here. According to the same press report, right, she may have been a QAnoner, talking about nothing can stop us. They can try and try, but the storm is here, right? So she's posting stuff, and now she's being labeled a QAnoner. Maybe she is, maybe she. I don't know. I really have a hard time understanding where the line in the sand is. How do they split you out on one side or the other? Let's take a look. Now, so candidly on that, right, there's a pretty easy way we do that in criminal law. You actually have to do something, right? You don't typically get arrested for thought crimes. You have a mental state, a guilty mental state, and you got to do some sort of action, right? Like would have been happening here. Somebody believed in something and then they took action. So we could prosecute them for trespass. We could prosecute them for whatever they are currently being prosecuted for. We've covered many of these cases. So we can do all of that. Do we need new laws in place? Do we need a new framework for dealing with these people, or do we already have one? Well, the Biden administration thinks we need a new framework for it. Not necessarily new laws, but there's going to be a new approach, and we're going to get to that here in a minute. So what else? On January 7th, FBI arrested a couple other people, firearms. They had hashtag QAnon in there, right? And they're talking about a new world order, a cabal, a deep state, all of that stuff. So again, right, this person was charged with making threats, allegedly bringing firearms and ammunition to D.C., making threats against the Speaker of the House, according to court documents. We've talked about these cases. We went through many of them here. We talked about the one gentleman who was not even in the Capitol building, right? Got into a fight the day after, but had traveled there and was sort of caught making statements that were not great about certain political people. And they said, well, based on that, that's a public threat. You were communicating that through text messages across state lines. We're going to treat that as a real and active threat. Even though you weren't on the Capitol grounds on January 6th, you were there on January 7th, the next night. We're still going to arrest you, and we're going to classify your arrest and your offense as being something that was very closely connected to the January 6th riots. So how do you draw the line on that one? Well, I guess you just follow whatever the government tells you. Then we also have on January 8th, federal law enforcement, they arrested an Oregon-based DVE, self-identified QAnon adherents over here. We have DVEs are U.S.-based actors, is their definition, who conduct and threaten activities that are dangerous to human life in violation of the criminal laws, according to the FBI. Right, intended to intimidate, coerce a civilian population, influence the policy of a government by intimidation or coercion, affect the conduct of a government by mass destruction or assassination or kidnapping, as per the definition of domestic terrorism. So they're referencing U.S. code. Now, what we're going to look at here is, it's funny, they talk a lot in this article about QAnon, but I wonder if any of this stuff applies to any other movements that are taking place in this country, right? If you talk about, affect the conduct of government by mass destruction. Like, so for example, I remember that there was a summer of 2020 where there were different little chops and chazzes going on around the west coast of the United States, where you would have this group of people who would actually take over some geographic area within a city, the Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone, right? Or the Chaz, remember that? And then we saw that happening in other parts around the country. We also saw that in Portland that they were throwing Molotov cocktails at a federal court building repeatedly, I think for several months on end, in fact. And we saw that there was a burning down of the 3rd precinct in Minneapolis during the aftermath of the George Floyd death. And the list goes on and on. We saw Wendy's being torched. We saw all sorts of used car lots being torched, which means that maybe some of those would be appropriate to classify as something like intimidating or coercing a civilian population. Right? Maybe that might be that. Could it be to influence the policy of a government by intimidation or coercion? Maybe affecting the conduct of the government by mass destruction, like throwing Molotov cocktails. How about you could make the argument that, there was theoretically kidnapping if people were locked inside of those Chaz zones or whatever, right? It's something that is very obvious that we see regularly here, but they're not in this document, are they? They're talking about QAnon because it's more about politics than it is about, in my opinion, security. Here is the last part of this FBI stuff. They're talking about the Oregon federal courthouse. Let's see what this is. Firing several rounds. So this person, so they are talking about the Portland or an Oregon federal courthouse. Let's see what this is. So somebody who was a QAnon adherent was arrested on charges of destroying government property, shot at a court building 2 days prior. They located him. QAnon, he says, yes, it's real, right? So DVE allegedly derailed a train. Okay, that's a big problem, derailing a train. So he wanted to just wake people up, right? Outlook, we assess that some DVE adherents of QAnon will likely to begin to believe that they can no longer, quote, trust the plan. That is often referenced by the QAnon posts. Calling them digital soldiers, saying that they're being perceived as members of a cabal or identifying members of a cabal like the Democrats, and the list goes on, right? Some interesting stuff in here if you want to read it. They say adherence to QAnon by some DVEs likely will be affected by factors like COVID and the level of societal polarization, social media companies' willingness to hold their content, and the list goes on and on, right? So this was prepared by the FBI and the U.S. Department of Homeland Security. So, nice job, gentlemen, going through there and identifying some of the real threats called QAnon. So, okay, so now what I want to do is I want to go through the actual document. Now, this was drafted by the National Security Council. Okay, here's what it looks like. You can see down here, stamped off on by the White House. National Strategy for Countering Domestic Terrorism. You see how the language changed a little bit, right? We see domestic terrorism here, and we see the New York Times talking about domestic extremism, right? And you may think that I'm mincing words here, but I'm not. This is very important stuff. So the National Strategy for Countering Domestic Terrorism, okay? Because with terrorists, we offer them sort of a lower standard of care in this country, right? We have Guantanamo Bay. We say, nah, you don't get a lot of the same protections that we apply to other people. You are a terrorist. You are not a citizen being charged with a crime like blowing up something or causing something to happen. You're being charged as a terrorist. And so we're going to sort of, start to strip away some of those constitutional protections that you might otherwise have, which leads me to be concerned about that because we're talking about domestic enforcement now. New York Times says there's a 32-page plan that synthesizes the steps that have been recommended by national security officials into one blueprint on how to more effectively identify the extremists in the country after years of a heightened focus on foreign terrorists, right? And the foreign terrorists, we really didn't know who they were or what they were doing. They were just sort of the bad guys. They attacked us, and so we had to go attack them. And I am somebody who I think, a sophomore in high school when 9/11 happened. It was 2001. Yeah, I would have been a sophomore, I think. And, at that moment in time, I sort of didn't really sink a lot of time into this national response strategy, right? I think I was 16, 17 when you're a sophomore, but I did follow it along shortly thereafter in the aftermath, right? And the whole country was upset about this, and we were being sold a bill of goods that there was, these weapons of mass destructions all over the place, and we were going to have to fly in there and sort out the business in the Middle East, and everybody was in favor of it, right? Hillary voted for it. I think Biden voted for it. Everybody voted for it. So we go off to war. And we've been fighting this thing for almost 20 years now. And we've been constantly fighting these terrorists. And so, we've had a lot of lives lost. We've had a lot of expenses that the country has paid. And it still seems like it's kind of a mess over there, right? I'm not real sure what has changed personally. But, that is something that we've been fighting through for a long time. But there's always been this little hard to define concept of terrorism. What are we doing over there? And you saw that people would say, oh, no war for oil, and this is America's interest, and we got to go over there, and we got to hit the enemy back, fight them over there, so we don't have to fight them over here. Remember that for like a decade? And it's always been this really hard to define concept of terrorism. And what is the point of all this? Are we focused on law enforcement and anti-terrorism to protect America? Are we talking about saving lives? Are we talking about saving money or economic opportunities? I mean, why are we doing these things as a country? And I know that the politicians and the bureaucrats think they understand why they're doing these things, but I would like to see some data to support it. If they're going to be telling us that they're going to be making these monumental shifts one direction or the other, I would like to see some justification for it, right? Why are we doing these things? Rather than just writing a bunch of paragraphs, like a bunch of word salad, where you're just dumping out your prospective plan, I would like to make sure that we have identified the problem appropriately, right? Anybody can go and just start doing a bunch of busy work and then come up and show you the work product after the fact and say, hey, look what I built. And it might be a nice, beautiful thing you built, but if it doesn't fix the problem, if it's not applicable to our current issue, then I don't really, that's a nice thing you did, but it might as well be a painting we just hang on the wall. It's not anything that's functional. And so we're going to see here a 32-page document that gives us a lot of solutions, a ton of solutions, and it gives us a lot of sort of broad problem analysis, right? It's sort of fleshing out all of these different problems. And let's see whether or not it actually means much of anything. So let's go into this article here. This is not an article, it's a report. The National Strategy for Countering Domestic Terrorism. I want to go through the intro first, because it's signed off on here by our boy Joe Biden. You see that down here in the bottom right. Joe R. Biden Jr. Here he is. says too often over the past years, American communities have felt wrenching pain of domestic terrorism. Okay, he's using that term there. Black church members, the Charleston shooting. We have a synagogue targeted immigrants. We have a gunman in El Paso targeting Latinos. And, those are his conclusions. It goes against everything our country strives to stand in the world. It poses a direct challenge to America's national security, our democracy, and our national unity. The strategy for countering domestic terrorism lays out a comprehensive approach while safeguarding American civil rights and civil liberties. We're going to see about that. Americans hold a wide array of beliefs. This is part of what makes America great, blah, 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 specifically addressing violence and other factors that lead to violence that violates the law, threatening public safety. We cannot ignore this threat anymore. Preventing domestic terrorism and reducing factors that fuel it. Okay, so working with all of our partners, this is a project that should unite all Americans. We must affirm that domestic terrorism has no place in our society. Must work to root out the hatreds, blah, 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 right? He's not saying much there other than that we're identifying this as a problem. And I think that most Americans would agree that nobody wants domestic terrorism to happen here. Let's see what his proposal is. This is what the table of contents looks like. So we've got introduction. We've got today's threat. This is where we should be identifying what the problem is clearly. We also have our approach. So what is the Biden administration going to do? They're going to do it by going through their strategic pillars, and then they're going to give us a conclusion about the way ahead. All right. So we've got a lot to go through here, and I'm not going to spend time reading 32 pages here, but I do want to go through and show you something that I was sort of working on to structure how I was thinking about this concern or this problem, right? What we have been seeing from the Biden administration is that they're talking very frequently about all of these different domestic problems. And they have identified a lot of different buckets to put the people in that they've got a lot of problems with. We've got white supremacists. We just talked about the QAnoners. We already heard about the militias, right? So we're starting to sort of categorize these different people. And what I've been trying to wrap my head around is how do you prioritize where you start? America has a lot of problems right now. Okay, we hear this all the time. We've got climate change, we've got inflation we talked about here, we've got poverty, economic issues, we've got the border crisis or non-crisis that Kamala is going to be trying to solve, we've got educational problems. The list goes on, right? So how do we start prioritizing these things? Many people would say that criminal justice is at the top of the list. We just went through a whole summer of a lot of problems in this country. Many people say that this is still going on. So we've got a lot of things that we got to work through in this country. Joe Biden and Merrick Garland and Mayorkas from the Department of Homeland Security, John Brennan, and the list goes on, have all been saying for a long time it's domestic violent extremism, now domestic terrorism, that is at the top of the list. So as I read through this document today, I started to keep a list of all of the different buckets of people that they're identifying as problematic. Let's put them on a spreadsheet. Let me show you what this looks like here. All right, this is something I put together this afternoon. When I read through this, this is everything that I saw could potentially be labeled an extremist. We've got the white supremacists. Okay, we already talked about them. Big, broad bucket. I really don't know, specifically if that is mentioning any groups. We're going to see. We've got the QAnoners. Okay, talked about them. FBI is very concerned. We got militias. We've got the militias here. We've got race-based shootings. Okay, we have general shootings. So we got the racial shootings. Then we have the general shootings. We have violence against women. We've got violence against the LGBTQ. We've got anti-government people. Okay, we've got involuntary celibates is what they mentioned in the report. We've got involuntary celibates now. Incels is something that they're mentioning. We've got anti-abortionists. We have animal rights activists that they mention in there. They also mention, believe it or not, environmental rights or environmental justice people. We have the anti-Semitic attacks. We have anti-Asian attacks. We have the COVID deniers. And then, of course, we have the Trumpers. Okay, so it's a big list of people. These are all, and this is not exhaustive. This is all that I could fit on one slide. But you can see here, this is a lot of people that we have to work our way through. So the question is, as a government, right? Shouldn't we be prioritizing different groups first rather than lumping all of these people into one bucket? Because it sounds like we've got a lot of different issues here. We've got somebody's, this group is mad about abortions. This group's mad about animal rights. The QAnoners are believing a conspiracy. The white supremacists apparently are just, a bunch of white supremacists. We've got anti-government people. I don't know that we would, so all of them would fit into the same bucket, but they're kind of throwing them in there. Then we've got anti-Asian attacks, right? Those are different than anti-Semitic attacks. And the list goes on and on. So we've got a lot of work to do. The way that I started to just sort of think about this, right? Which one of these, if we're going to be focusing on how to prioritize our efforts, we should be identifying where the biggest problems are, should we not? Which one of these groups is responsible for the biggest loss of life in this country? I don't know the answer to that, but I'd be curious to know if we have any answers on that, right? We hear a lot that the white supremacists are very, very dangerous, very responsible for all of this. We're going to see in this report, they talk a lot about them. So I would like to know what these numbers are. How many people are the white supremacists responsible for killing or eliminating every year? And how much money does that cost the country? And what is the economic impact of that? And how big is this group so we can start addressing it? Okay, so that we can begin identifying where they are and how we start to respond to this. And I'm just thinking about this practically, not as a lawyer, not as anybody that has a lot of experience solving these issues on a global macro scale, but generally, wouldn't you want to identify what the problems are, make a list of the problems, right? We do this I do this in my law firm. If I got a list of issues I need to work through, I say I got these things I got to do in my day, and this one has priority. Why? Urgency or revenue, or I have personnel support that I need to come help me solve this problem. And so you start to identify the different factors, and then you rank them and you start knocking them out. So when we're talking about all of these extremist groups, I mean, wouldn't it be good to know maybe about their geographic location? Are they all in one location? Are they all people of a particular religion or a particular income or a particular profession? Do they have the same age, similar gender, similar ethnicities? Okay, we're talking about a lot of different factors here. And so I want to start understanding this. If our government is telling us this is the biggest problem in the world for America, the biggest domestic issue that we have, and we're going to be sinking a ton of resources into solving this, how specifically? Let's see what the plan has to say. Before we get there, though, you notice that big list. We talked a lot of, there's a lot of different extremist buckets on there. You know who is really kind of not in there, surprisingly? Well, any of these searches. So when I did a Control F and tried to find Antifa, didn't find anything there, right? 0 results in this list. So we got all these people. All of these people might be dangerous, but we don't have Antifa if you search the document. Search for BLM, don't see that anywhere, right? So obviously they're not considering that to be one of those groups. Black Lives doesn't show up once, so it's not just the acronym. If you start to search for anti-fascist, anything like that, nope, not going to pop up, right? Antifa's not in there. Critical race theory, which may be something that might be contributing to some of the racial animosity in the country, right? The list goes on and on. So they're just sort of selecting a certain group of people that they are already labeling as domestic terrorism just by excluding some of the other groups. They're just not in this document. Unless I Control F wrong, but I think I got it. It's not in there. So the same people that we've been seeing actually, throwing Molotov cocktails at court buildings, actually burning down the 3rd precinct, actually killing people on a regular basis throughout this country, that have been seizing land, they're not in this list. So those people are not domestic terrorists by my first glance at this. Now let's take a look at the introduction. Okay, so this is what the document is telling us. It says, domestic terrorism is not a new threat. It's happened over centuries. After the Civil War, we had the KKK, Black Americans, Klan. We have killing of 23 people at a retail store in El Paso. We got the Charlottesville incident. We got the Garlic Festival. We've got Victoria, Texas. We've got Asian Americans. We've got the surge in anti-Semitism. So you see what's happening? We just identified a bunch of people on that list. The white supremacists. We've got the a racial shooting in El Paso. We're starting to see what's going on here. Domestic terrorists has also happened. 1995, we had the Oklahoma City bombing, 168 people, which absolutely sounds like domestic terrorism to me. Okay, when I think of domestic terrorism, that's what I'm talking about. We have a lone gunman wounded people at baseball practice, and just months ago we had January 6th. Okay, today's threat. Now we have domestic terrorism. It's a serious and evolving threat, says the White House. Provision of federal law defines it as activities that involves acts that are dangerous to human life, that are a violation of criminal laws, that are intended to intimidate. We already read that in the last FBI document, right? So I would go ahead and venture to say, I would sort of walk out on that limb and say that I think that some of the BLM activities and some of the Antifa activities absolutely fall into that category. Over time, domestic terrorism in the U.S., they've ebbed and flow, but today's domestic terrorist threat, as assessed comprehensively, is a mix of elements. According to this assessment, one key aspect emerges from domestic terrorism is it's from racial and ethnically motivated violent extremists and networks whose racial, ethnic, and religious hatred leads them towards violence. Okay, so I would like to know a little bit more about that group, right? One key aspect. We're learning a little bit more about them. Now, these actors, they have different motivations, but they focus towards the same segment or segment of the community. Okay, so, well, that's kind of difficult to segment that out then. right? We're sort of trying to pull people out of the bucket and examine the problem a little bit. This person has this interest, this person has this interest, and they're saying, well, they all have different motivations, but they're focusing on many same segments like immigrants, Jews, Muslims, religious minorities, women and girls, LGBTQI, and others. Their insistence on violence can be at times explicit. So what this document is telling me is that, no, we can't actually separate them out. Okay, we can't do that. They have different motivations, but they focus their violence towards people of color, immigrants, Jews, Muslims, and other religious minorities, women and girls, and so on. Okay? So maybe we can't do what I wanted to do and sort of separate this out. Another key component of the threat comes from anti-government, or anti-authority violent extremists. So I think I'm in the clear because I'm not violent. I'm not violent, YouTube. You hear me? All right. Another key component of the threat comes from anti-government people. The significant component of today's threat includes self-proclaimed militias. What the hell is a militia? Let's find out. And militia violent extremists who take steps to violently resist government authority, or who facilitate to overthrow the government based on perceived overreach. We have anarchists. They violently oppose all forms of capitalism. Is that true? Is that true about anarchists? All right, well, they got sovereign citizens who they're not happy about. They believe they're immune from the government authority. Individual or groups who engage in violence, incite violence. We've got other domestic extremists. Look at this little quote here right in the middle. Domestic terrorists have often been lone actors or small groups of informally aligned individuals. Don't you like that? Small groups. And they're lone actors, which means what I was trying to do is sort of tease these people out and identify them so that we could get a clear eye on what the government intends to do, because they're going to be starting to prosecute these cases. But they're telling us, oh no, we can't, they're lone actors. So what does that mean? That means that they can't focus on any particular group. So what does that mean? Practically speaking, they got to focus on everything, everybody, right? That's what we talk about with these dragnets. That's what they're talking about with working with social media companies that we read at the start of the show. They're talking about gobbling up more information, more data, information sharing at your expense, because they can't identify these different groups. They can't go out, according to this document, and find individual people who are part of a bigger group. They're saying specifically, no, they're lone wolves. They are small groups. They're informally aligned. So how do you enforce against that? It's the same way that they enforce against terrorism. It's the same strategies. And we've already seen this from other security officials here on this show. We've talked about it, talking about using some of the same strategies and tactics that they used overseas in Afghanistan and Iraq right here. Now, they're all saying, oh no, but we're going to protect your constitutional rights. We're not going to step on your civil liberties when we do this. Has that happened historically? Do we trust our government to sit there and tell us that they're not going to step all over our faces? I don't. Okay, because we have a historical record of this. Didn't happen when the last time we went after terrorism, and it hasn't been happening in this country for some time, as been revealed by Snowden and others. All right. Domestic terrorists have, in recent years, they've been lone actors or small groups. These individuals consume material deliberately disseminated to recruit individuals. So now we're going to be focused on stopping recruitment. That's going to be one of the pillars we talk about. The ideologies can be fluid, evolving, and overlapping. It's hard to dissect them. And in some instances, they can connect and intersect with conspiracy theories and other forms of disinformation and misinformation. The often solitary and at times rapid nature of the mobilization poses a particularly acute challenge to law enforcement and others seeking to prevent, disrupt, and deter domestic extremism, right? It's a hard thing for them to do, which is why they need a lot of power to do it. They need a lot of material, a lot of money, a lot of resources, and they need you to just understand a little bit how complicated this is. And so they appreciate that while they're going to continue to investigate you. These elements, they say, combine to form a complex and shifting domestic terrorism threat landscape, create significant challenges, especially on internet-based communications platforms like social media sites, end-to-end encrypted platforms, not happy about those. All these elements can combine and amplify threats to public safety. This is domestic violence terrorism that America faces today, the distinctive imprint of the digital age. Tackling this threat comprehensively and persistently demands appreciating its historical lineage and its distinctively modern form. All right, so we've got a lot more to get through on this, so we're going to pick up the pace a little bit, but you can see what's happening here. They're sort of first of all, there's not much actually happening. Let's see if we can piece together where they're saying this is such a concern. All right, there it is. When I broadcast from the studio, my switcher is a little bit different. So my fingers press the wrong buttons because I have a different switcher. Anyways, here it is. So assessment of the domestic violent extremism threat, March 2021. So what I've been concerned about here is what we've been reading about is sort of a lot of generalization of the problem, right? We hear a lot about this. Violent extremists, white supremacy. We hear some of the, I would say the historical examples that they will call to be domestic, extremism or domestic terrorism. And I understand that. But my question is, what are they going to be focused on practically moving forward, right? And I understand they're telling us militias, and I understand they're telling us white supremacy, but specifically, I'd like a little bit more specifics about what that means and where this entire shift comes from. So it comes from this report, March 2021. The intelligence community, the IC, it says that domestic violent extremists are motivated by a range of ideologies galvanized by recent events and pose an elevated threat in 2021. They've got biases against minority populations. They've got perceived government overreach. They will certainly continue to drive radicalization and mobilization. Newer social political developments, such as narratives of fraud in the recent election, emboldening impact of the violent breach of the Capitol, conditions related to COVID-19, and conspiracy theories promoting violence will almost certainly spur some DVEs to try to engage in violence this year. So we're not going to get any specifics. We're just not. It's just going to be broad strokes throughout the rest of this document. Our approach, they say, addressing terrorism effectively, responsibly requires moving swiftly. We're going to forge a government-wide effort while safeguarding law enforcement prerogatives. Investigatory, prosecutorial decisions they're talking about. We're going to build a community to address domestic terrorism that extends not only across the government, but also to critical partners. So they're going to be working with state, local, territorial governments, civil society, technology, academia, and more. Domestic terrorism and the factors that contribute to it pose a challenge, best tackled by interlocking everybody. Here's our goal. Number one, understand and share information. So they want to strategically, number one, 1.1, enhance domestic terrorism related research and analysis. Any threat requires understanding it thoroughly. Yeah, beyond just using broad strokes like white supremacists. What does that mean? So they're going to do some analysis on that, so that's great. Maybe they'll tell us what this all means when they do their analysis. 1.2, they want to improve information sharing, which I've been hearing about for the last, 20 years, right? Wasn't that the problem after 9/11? Nobody was talking to each other. This is a huge problem. I was listening to a podcast on this by Balaji Srinivasan, most interesting man in the world right now, literally. And he was talking about rebuilding all of our supply chains for information because they're broken. They're garbage. We've been talking about intergovernmental communication as long as I've been alive. And many people were blaming the 9/11 attack, which was actual terrorism, on a lack of knowledge. FBI wasn't communicating with the CIA, didn't have DHS back then, but you get the picture. So we're still focused on that 20-something years later. Now, improve information sharing, got that. 1.3, illuminate the transnational aspects of domestic terrorism. So now they're going to be saying that if it's domestic, it's also being funded outside of the country, right? So some domestic violent extremists have sought ties and connections to people overseas. Pillar number 2, they want to prevent domestic terrorism recruitment and mobilization to violence. So how are they going to do that? For those who break the law, they want reducing the supply and demand of recruitment materials. Okay, so this means censorship, isn't it? They want to get on the internet and make sure that you're not, spreading this stuff around. So we're going to see more partnerships with their tech partners, and we're going to see some more limitations on that, certainly. 2.2, we've got address online terrorist recruitment and mobilization. So we'll see more of this. They're very unhappy with a lot of the stuff that's taking place in the crypto space. Very unhappy with this end-to-end encrypted chat platforms. Not happy about that. They do not like the concept of decentralization. We're seeing that very regularly. Check out the crypto channel if you're interested in any of that. We've got pillar number 3, disrupt and deter domestic terrorism activity. So we've got enable appropriate enhanced investigation. Oh, I wonder what that means. Remember those enhanced interrogation techniques that George Bush was cramming through? Back then, all of the liberals were having conniption fits over that. I remember that specifically. Remember waterboarding? how long we got beat up over that. Everybody was killing each other over the waterboarding stuff. Well, now and George Bush back then, he said it's not torture, okay? This is enhanced interrogation. Pretty clever. Biden administration has taken one out of that playbook. They want enhanced investigation and prosecution now. So that's going to be good. The FBI, they say, has been central to the U.S. government. They make their investigations. They investigate all sorts of forms of terrorism. We've got it, right? They already do all of this. They already investigate terrorism, including domestic terrorism. So I'm not sure what enhanced investigation they need, but they want to assess potential legislative reform. So pass some more laws, cram some more garbage down our throats because we don't have enough of those. 3.3, ensure that the screening and vetting processes consider a full range of terrorism threats. Unless it's going to be Black Lives Matter, which is not in here, and unless it's going to be Antifa. Those are approved domestic terrorism, folks. You got to be careful. You know, if you want to be involved in domestic terrorists, make sure it's a pre-approved by the Biden administration. Otherwise, you could get in trouble. Now we have Pillar 4, confront long-term contributors to domestic terrorism. It can take many forms. As we know, they don't even know. I mean, look, we've got racial, ethnic, religious hatred, dehumanizing portions of the American community. I see that all the time. I would like to see that stop. I can't stand the dehumanization of people. Tackling the long-term contributors. This means tackling racism in America. So Joe Biden is going to solve racism in America. That's good. Protecting Americans from gun violence, and the list goes on. So how are we going to move ahead? The way forward, the way ahead, they say. We've done this before. We've got the Oklahoma City bombing again, LGBTQ plus again. We've got this document represents strategy, a strategy whose implementation is already well underway. We're going to be steered if we forge a community across everywhere. We're going to be stronger together, they all say. So equality for all. Isn't that nice? Okay, well, let's take a look at some questions over from watchingthewatchers.locals.com. We've got Joe Snow is in the house. What's up, Joe? Says, domestic terrorist to a Democrat administration just means a patriot. Yeah, certain of them. Right? There's a whole bucket of domestic terrorists they're not happy with, but some they just don't really blink an eye at. We've got Joe Snow says, I don't think Putin would prefer Trump to Biden because Biden will make Russia pipeline a lot of money. Yet I find it interesting that he's now done more for justice for Ashley Babbitt than any other GOP congressman or senator. I think, are you referencing, that Biden has done more for Ashley Babbitt? Arguably, maybe, right, by sort of not doing much. A lot of people are up in arms over that case. We've got Want to Know says, Portland mayor wanting Antifa unmasked and arrested. Finally tired of businesses getting destroyed using the FBI for help receive death threats from Antifa, FBI, and police task force. Said this is domestic terrorism. Yeah, the Portland mayor kind of changed his tune a little bit, a couple times, right? Very, very pro-protesters. No, he wanted to go out and hang out with them. I think we played that video on this channel. Could be wrong. But I remember Wheeler wanted to go out there and hang out with the protesters, and they started to throw him out. Didn't work out well for him. Sharon Quidney is in the house. Sharon says, you say that nobody wants domestic extremism, but I really question that. We see looting, killing, arson, mayhem condoned, and even applauded, or at least exonerated as peaceful protests last year and going forward. If all that isn't violent domestic extremism, I don't know what is. It's a good point, Sharon. Yeah, it's a really good point, right? I guess I don't want it, period. I think that maybe if I had to modify my position, it would be that, this stuff is bad. Let me characterize their position as I understand it. Domestic violent extremism is bad unless it's for a positive ideology. Okay. And I'm not out of bounds on this one because we saw the same thing happen with COVID. Lockdowns are good and social distancing is mandatory, and you're killing grandma unless you do that, unless it's for a BLM protest. Because we saw that. We saw actual scientists and doctors say things like, well, health is a bigger issue than just your physical body. Okay, there's racism that exists in the medical profession. And so people need to speak out, and we have to think about medicine holistically. And so we have to exonerate racism from the medical community as well. Therefore, the virus is not as lethal if you're protesting racial injustice. All right, next up, we've got LT13 says, I posted Darren Beatty's article that the non-indicted people found in the other people's indictment paperwork from 1/6 were the more violent looks to be the FBI or informants. They are now white supremacist and patriot extremists. Also, the Michigan FBI leader that had people embedded in the Whitmer thing is now in D.C. in charge of 1/6. Wow. I have no doubt about any of that. So, I think that this is a very, very political prosecution. I think I've been pretty consistent about that. I think that we're going to start to see some resolutions here soon. We saw one of them. I can't remember what that one was, but I want to compare and contrast these things. I want to know whether the Capitol Hill protests, whether those people who are being charged and indicted and sort of dragged through the ringer in that justice system in DC, if they're going to be getting the same deals that all of the Antifa people got in other parts of the country, because we talked about their outcomes here, right? And I've said this historically, I really don't necessarily care what political side of the aisle you're on. I think that as long as you're not being politically prosecuted by the justice system, I'm okay with that either way. I don't want to see it against the Trump people. I don't want to see it against the Antifa or the BLM people. If they're doing something that warrants prosecution, they should get prosecution just like the Trump people should. And I've been consistent about that. But I also say that I don't think the people should have the books thrown at them in the criminal law either way, right? Charge it as a regular trespass case if it was a regular trespass case. If somebody's throwing a Molotov cocktail to burn a building down, right, you escalate that up a little bit. So you just have to sort of look at it on a case-by-case basis. And I've been trying to do that with the Capitol Hill protesters. And what has been happening to them, in my opinion, has been grossly out of the norm that we see elsewhere in criminal law. We see the government somehow can't prosecute their cases. They've got 300-400 cases, and they needed like 60-day continuances because they couldn't handle an increased workload. Give me a break, folks. Any city that has a Super Bowl or a big sporting event is going to see a bubble of criminality. Happens all the time, all over the world, many, many times. Happens in Arizona every time we get the Super Bowl, or there's the Phoenix Open, Waste Management Open. Get big bubbles of crime, and we got to deal with it. Now, the Washington people out there, apparently they are too incompetent to handle an extra 300 cases. So they asked for a bunch of continuances. Meanwhile, they were opposing any of the release conditions that the defendants were requesting. They wanted them to sit in custody. Then the government was asking for continuances. And when they did so, the one case, I think Chansley's lawyer didn't even object to it. Said, okay, no problem. Yeah, he'll just sit in custody for another 60 days. The whole thing is a political prosecution, top to bottom. And it's very offensive for somebody who believes in justice and the presumption of innocence, and that all defendants across the board should be treated equally, not overly be admonished because of their political ideology. It's a huge problem. I don't like how this is trending in this country. Angie says, so before whoever questioned the narrative were labeled as conspiracy theorists, now it's going to be domestic terrorists. Right. P.S. Love the crypto channel. I got to get some more content up on that one. The last one I posted was about that pipeline. I'm going to start sinking some time into it. Last week on crypto, I sort of had to do a hiatus because we did law enforcement interaction training, which was a ton of fun. And I came up with the 2-3 rule, but I'm going to call it the 1-2-3 rule. And I actually, yeah, we'll unveil that later. So go check that out at my Gumroad down there, and check out the crypto channel too. Love you. We've got Todd Trout in the house. Says, so before whoever questioned, oh no, we already got that one. Todd's here, says, what determines a domestic extremist? Does Antifa qualify, or is it just an idea? It's a good point there, Todd. Maybe that's why it's not in the report, because it's just an idea. And we only talk about the extremist. I don't know. I mean, I still don't really know what an extremist is. This is one of those terms that is it's so gray. There's a lot of gray area there that you can sort of, I think maneuver this however you want. A close analogy that we see often in criminal law is the crime called disorderly conduct. Okay, it kind of means whatever you want it to mean. Cops know this too. They show up. If it's any sort of disturbance, like anything, the statute is so broad, they can just say, oh, well, you were disorderly. Well, how was I being disorderly? That conduct was disorderly. And you go, well, what conduct? And they go, well, I don't know. You just slammed the door shut too hard and your neighbor called the police. You broke that bowl. Somebody called the police. They're unhappy about that. You get arrested. You got to deal with the whole thing. It's a mess. Now we're going to do the same thing here. A domestic extremist. I don't really know what that means. I'm not sure they do either. That's the point. It's to their benefit. There's this phrase called, you make your money in the mess. When things are messy, intentionally, then you can go out there and sort of clean it up if you know how to navigate the mess. What the government is doing. All right. Sharon says, all this is about domestic terrorism It's aimed at anyone who is not on board with the communist BLM CRT agenda and the program to eradicate civil liberties and expand Big Brother government. I agree with that. I think that's really what stuff like this is for. It is to give them just a blank slate to go do whatever they want under the guise of domestic extremism. We have Barbie Ann says, this sounds like the Sedition Acts under President Adams against Jefferson. I'm still in shock that the current president has in essence called me a terrorist. My father and uncles, all World War II veterans, are turning in their graves. I know, it's a horrible thing, isn't it? It really is a horrible thing. It's totally, inappropriate to call good American people terrorists. But that's the world that we're living in, I guess. We've got E. Dantes says, nowadays, you can call anybody anything. You don't need to provide a proof or an explanation. You have been called a Nazi. I've been accused of white supremacy because I didn't post a BLM tag on Facebook. Where are these violent white supremacist attacks happening? I would love to know. I see a lot of cities that were on fire, but did not see the KKK with carrying torches. The shootings you mentioned were not white supremacist groups. There's no evidence. That's exactly my point, Edon Test, and you just nailed it better than I could. You absolutely hit it, right? We're talking a lot about this, but it feels like it's sort of a problem or a solution in search of a problem. I know that there are white supremacist groups. I know that there are racist people in this country, but I just haven't seen it to the same scale that I've seen the BLM riots, the BLM protests, the burning of cities, or the Antifa protests. But we're not talking about those. They were not even in this document. Not even once. A Control F shows nothing. They're talking about it in a bunch of other terms that serve their political ends. Where does that go? Well, it just elevates and evolves right into political prosecutions. So we're already in the middle of it. We're already seeing what's happening with the Capitol Hill people. You think it's going to change now? No, they just put it in a blueprint. 32 pages. Go read it. We've got Cove Queen says, so is anyone going to tell this administration that statistics exist? It may be helpful to determine the actual dangers to our nation. Yeah, it would be good, right? So where should we put our priorities? And truthfully, right, if there was a report that came out, if somebody said, hey, look, Rob, look, there are all these different groups. It's this group and this group and this group and this group. And their membership, this group's got 50,000 members. This group has 100,000 members. And this group has 1 million members. And here's what they're planning. They are responsible for this attack. And they've got this much land. And they've got this many firearms and this many weapons. And this is their leader. And they've made some public threats and all of these things. Now, I know that law enforcement can tell us almost nothing of that, right? Because it's part of their investigation. They are doing their law enforcement thing where they're investigating these cases and trying to get to the bottom of it. So they're not going to come out and say, hey, Rob, I know that you have some questions about what we're doing with these DVEs. And so let me give you just a rundown. We've got this group under surveillance and this group under surveillance and this group. I get it, right? I'm not expecting that. I'm not asking for that. I don't want that. They can continue to do their investigations appropriately. But I would like a little bit more specificity on it, because what they're telling us is a catastrophic problem doesn't match the same reality. I sat here, I watched it with my own eyes, and even CNN was playing it, right? Mostly peaceful protests as there's a nuclear bomb went off behind that guy in the city back there. It is transparently obvious to me that there are certain contingents in this country that have a lot more activity, let's put it that way, than some of these other groups, at least that I can see. If somebody wants to come out here and say, no, look, they're responsible for this much death, this much economic damage, they're responsible for this much catastrophe in America, I'll be the first one to say, wow, you're kidding me. I had no idea. Why didn't we hear about this on the New York Times or CNN or the Washington Post or Fox News for that matter? Why are we not hearing about it? Well, if they're going to tell us that something exists, I need a little bit more evidence. Unfortunately, I've lost about all the faith that we have in this current government, in its current form. And I don't mean because it's Biden. I mean in general, okay? The American government is just mostly ineffective. And I'm not going to take anything they tell us at face value anymore. Why should we? Because they have been lying to us on record. They've been telling us, you can go back and play the clips of Fauci. Go back and play the clips of any number one of these people who were supposed to be the scientists guiding us through this crisis. They were all off. All right. We've got I'm Not Gas says, I believe the domestic violent extremist is a clever wordplay to try to remove gun rights. Good point. As in most states, people merely accused of domestic violence lose their gun rights. I think I may have made that point historically, previously, I'm Not Gas, but your point is still astute. It's very, very well done. I agree with that, right? And domestic violence has a lot of bad connotations. In Arizona, automatic, right? You don't even have to be convicted. They just, the laws say that they're going to start to remove guns from you. And as we see more and more gun control, as we see more and more people start to, to sort of expand the government's authority to remove certain rights from you, I think you're exactly right. I'm not guess that this is sort of a wedge, right? They can get in the door here and start to expand that up a little bit. Just latch on to the domestic violence, tack on extremist, and then carry over a lot of the same automatic consequences that you get in domestic violence cases right over into these other types of prosecutions, right? You call it a domestic violent extremist, and maybe that was a crime that has nothing to do with guns. It could have been just a simple trespass case or something, something along those lines that doesn't involve a firearm or a weapon. But now if they're classified under the domestic violent category and you apply a lot of the same domestic violence regulations towards that, then maybe they have to suddenly give up their gun rights instantaneously, because we already have an existing framework here. People don't also recognize that domestic violence is sort of an add-on in many states. In Arizona, there isn't really a crime called domestic violence. You don't go and get charged with domestic violence by itself. You get charged with assault/domestic violence. There was a physical action here, and that physical action involves somebody that you're in a relationship with. That's what makes it domestic violence. You can still assault somebody at a bar in your old town, whatever facility that, whatever you have, 6th Street or whatever, and that would not be a domestic situation. But because it involves somebody else, it elevates it. So domestic violence maybe could be just added on to whatever any other underlying criminal activity is from these extremists. It's a very nuanced point, but I think it's very important. I think language is important, and that's exactly what they're doing. All right, enough of that. We've got Bloopy. Says, I'm still confused how white supremacy is the #1 threat in America. Yeah, I don't know either. And, I've seen sort of the #1 threat. So they're getting very clever with this. They're getting very careful with this. I've seen Joe Biden say something like it is like the biggest threat, but then also sort of it's the biggest domestic threat, and it's the biggest, American threat. And so I don't ever think I've heard him say, white supremacy is the #1 threat in America, but pretty damn close to that. It's definitely up there. And so I want to know, right? What's number 2? What's number 3? What's the top 5? Is white supremacy in the top 5 list of problems for America? Is there a journalist anywhere who's going to ask anybody in the administration of that question? Where do you place domestic violent extremism on your list of priorities? Add it on everything. The economy, COVID, immigration, international relationships, Russia, if you want to include that. Where is it? Is this in the top 5, the top 10? Or is it in the top 3? I don't know. We have got Kenny 1B says, behind the firewalls, it appears that the FBI is obsessed with current and former law enforcement and military members who participated on January 6th. They frequently tally and publish running numbers of those involved. Yeah, they're very excited about it. The FBI too, right? They're almost not doing much else on their Twitter. They're just looking for that grandma. They still can't find grandma. She's still wandering around out there. The FBI, they got nothing better to do. So they're going to go track her down, make sure she's brought to justice. Good job, fellas. Kareem165 says the situation currently is not the same as the worst of Nazi Germany. The situation currently is not the same. However, there are elements that to me resemble the early stages of Nazism. In Canada, they are detaining people and locking them up, quote, due to COVID. Yeah, and we talked about this a lot. So Viva Frey we've done streams on each other's channel. He's doing a lot of work on that topic up there. So go check out his channel. Pastors are being arrested for holding church services. I saw that. Until tomorrow, Ontarians, they cannot legally cross the border into Quebec. It's amazing. And Justin Trudeau was out there at the G7 just kind of yucking it up with everybody at a beachside barbecue, not exercising much social distancing at all. But if you want to hold a church service, apparently in Canada, you get arrested for that. So that's a nice democracy, isn't it? We have Besimiento. And listen, I've been to Canada, and I happen to love our Canadian friends up there. I'm sorry that this is happening to you. And I'm hopeful that enough people will speak out that it never happens again to you up there. Let me just say that. We have Besimiento says the biggest domestic terrorists undermining this country is those that promote and engage in election fraud from the FBI. Election frogs is what we say on this channel because Joe Biden is the president. We all know that. But certainly, I understand what you're saying. We got Osak says, this is nothing new. After 9/11, the Patriot Act went into effect. FISA court, fusion centers. What I think needs to change is the person's right to see if there is a file open on them. Person's right to see if there's a file open on them. Checking for correctness should be top of the issues. What do you think? So I like that idea. I mean, this is something that kind of attorneys often do for people. Somebody will come to our office and they'll say, hey man, something happened. The cops showed up. They didn't arrest me. They didn't cite me, but they took this, they took that. I'm afraid something's going to happen. So they come to us, they hire us for what's called an investigation. Then we will sort of reach out and figure out what's going on, right? We can make contact with law enforcement. We can make contact with the prosecutor's office and see what status the investigation is at. But it is a little bit of a game of finagling, right? They don't have to tell us much of anything. So I understand your perspective. It would be a lot more convenient for me if I could just say, hey, is anything on this guy? And they had to log everything, but that's unfortunately just not how investigations work. Because if you were under investigation and they had to tell you about that, then they couldn't oftentimes complete their investigation. So I think there's good reason why we don't have that rule, but yeah, it would be nice. I agree with you. It would be very nice to just go onto a website and see, hey, Robert Gruler. Oh, look, the FBI, CIA, DHS, ATF. Great. That's fun. Sleep well tonight. Be Brave says, I was planning to hang my Trump 1 flag, but the feds will be hunting me down now. Who didn't see this coming? Well, you just don't have to show them. We're all going to have to make our little bunkers, I think, at some point. All right, great questions. Thank you for all of those that came over from watchingthewatchers.locals.com, which is our, sort of off the big tech platform community. And we appreciate your support over there. There's a lot of good stuff over there. You can download a copy of my book, download a copy of the slides. You can get some pretty good promo codes for some of these courses here. This is my Gumroad account. So I'm starting to release some more stuff that's some more kind of like info material. And I would love your support over there. So if you go to gumroad.com/Robert Gruler, this is a great app. You can download apps and you can listen to all of these. If you're on Locals, be sure to check Locals before you purchase anything because there are some good promo codes over there. And if you don't want to buy anything now, I would still appreciate a follow because I've got some cool stuff in the works. This is a QR code. If you prefer that, just take a picture with your phone. Also, absolutely got to talk about our law firm, R&R Law Group. On this channel, we talk a lot about politics, but at our law firm, it's boots on the ground every day. We help people with felony charges, traffic tickets, drug charges, DUI cases, everything in between. So if you need any help, there's another QR code. You can also give us a call at that number down there, 480-787-0394. We really appreciate all of your love and support. We're very passionate about what we do. So thank you for that, and we will continue on to the next segment. All right. So next up, we've got to talk about some Popo. How should I start this? A new viral video was just released showing the police in Maryland tasing a 17-year-old. That's right. This young man was smoking a vape pen, and the police went up upon him, and they wanted him to stop. And so when he didn't do that, he got tased. So we're going to take a look at this story. This is interesting. This video actually went viral. It's got 3 million views. A lot of people are up in arms about this, but if you watch very slowly, you're going to see the exact moment that prompted the officers to fire that taser at him. So we're going to go through this. Let's lay down a little bit of foundation here. First and foremost, we're going to get some backstory from the New York Post. The viral video, it shows the cops tase him for vaping on the boardwalk out in Maryland. So his hands are up, as we're going to see, mostly. Watch this language. Shocking video show the moment that the cops tase a teenager with his hands up. Mostly up. Watch. Now, a now viral video clip, 3 million views. He was in Ocean City on June 6th. Without moving away, he appears to unhook a strap to his backpack, which witnesses say was an order from the officers. Then clutch his stomach and fall after going stiff from being zapped with a taser. So you see this conversation here, right? You're going to see this guy slowly drop his hand back. Taser goes off right then and there. So if the allegation is that his hands were up and they shot him when his hands were up, that's not accurate, right? He actually does drop his hand down. Now, if the police at the same time are barking orders at him, we've seen this many times before. We saw this in a case here in Arizona. The officer was Brailsford and was ordering this guy to stand up, sit down, cross your legs, get on your knees, crawl towards us, don't crawl towards us, lay flat on the ground, all these different instructions. And then when the guy here in Arizona actually reached his hand back, the officer shot and killed him. That didn't happen here. Okay, this guy, they may have been barking orders at him. We're going to watch the video. You're going to see there's a lot of action there, but let's frame this out a little bit more. So, stop. He was standing there. An upset woman screams. What is wrong with you? Another man asks. Y'all did that for no reason, a woman tells the officer. He was literally standing there. Okay, we are aware of the social media videos, the town said. The use of force from these arrests will go through a multi-level examination. However, the statement stressed our officers are permitted to use force per their training to overcome exhibited resistance. So let's see what this looks like. Saturday's incident, Brian Everett Anderson, so he's actually 19, was charged with disorderly conduct. Second-degree assault, failure to provide proof of identity. Don't you love that? Let's see what this second-degree assault looks like. Then we have Kamir Anthony Day, 19, arrested for allegedly yelling profanities, also charged with disorderly conduct. You see these charges? I just got done talking about disorderly conduct. They charge it for everything. Obstructing and hindering, failing to obey a reasonable order, resisting an arrest, and second-degree assault. We have also Jatik Joseph John Lewis, 18, same stuff. Pushing a public safety aid, yelling profanities while trying to pick up a police bicycle and hit an aid. He was charged also with disorderly conduct and some other things. Let's see. Dwayne was busted for becoming disorderly when he was told to move from standing on private property. Warren was charged with trespassing. They were seen in the Maryland District Court, released on their own personal recognizance. So let's see what's going on here. This is the incident. Okay, so his hands are up. He's sort of surrounded by several different officers. Police in Ocean City, Maryland, tasered a 17-year-old. Apparently he's 19, so we'll make a note of that. After they accused him of vaping. Now, as we play this video, watch this hand over here. Okay, so he drops this hand down here, and that's exactly when he gets tased.
Chill. Stop. Get out. What's wrong with you? Back up!
It happened last year too.
Back up!
All right, let's watch that one more time before we let it play through again. So see if you can hear anything. The audio is pretty loud. Let's see if we can hear them shout an order.
Chill. Stop. Get out. What's wrong with you? Back up!
It happened last year too.
Back up! Y'all did that for a vape, bro.
Y'all did that for no reason.
For a vape.
Call your mom.
That is the weirdest shit ever. Bro, what the fuck? For no reason. Bro, put him in handcuffs for a vape.
He was literally standing there. He wasn't arresting or he wasn't nothing.
Yeah.
He was.
All right, so this is apparently another angle. But that doesn't look like the same. Yeah, it does. Okay. All right, so yeah, as you can see, it is not a good situation. Now, it's hard to tell whether the cops said anything about take the backpack off or anything like that. It's hard to sort of process this when you're somebody who's sort of being surrounded by 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 officers and they're all barking orders at you. Maybe he did hear somebody say, take your backpack off, so he was going to take it off, and they shot it, tased him anyways. Candidly, that guy is fortunate he's not dead. It's not a good situation. So we're going to see what law enforcement says, and they're going to continue to do their investigation. So next up, we've got another situation out of Savannah, Georgia. So this gentleman here, his name is William Zachary Harvey. He's a man who died in police custody. He's a son, uncle, and caregiver. So to Charlie Francis, he was a brother. He was added more. He was an uncle. And he was found hanging in a Savannah Police Department interrogation room on April 2nd after being brought in for questioning for aggravated assault. Right, this guy right here. So he died by suicide through a hanging, and 5 Georgia officers were fired as a result. Wonder what happened there. Let's take a look. 1 is on probation while 5 other were fired, said the attorneys of the man who died. Savannah Police Department, they fired these officers. We got Corporal Silver Luschner. We got Sergeant Michael Kerr. They were both immediately terminated after the initial investigation. Matthew White was suspended, but 3 other officers, we got Sergeant Christopher Hewitt, Corporal Erica Tremblay, and Officer David Curtis, they were terminated after sharing a meme of the hanging death in a group chat. Not good. So I don't know what that means, right? Obviously, I didn't go try to find this meme or anything like that to post here, but it sounds like maybe somebody took a picture of him and then they shared it in a group chat. Obviously, that's not appropriate, especially for law enforcement. I understand gallows humor. Okay, I get that, but not in this context. Totally inappropriate. A man died in their custody, probably due to their negligence to some degree, and it's not appropriate to be joking about it. So another officer was placed on probation. According to police department release, Harvey was taken to police headquarters for questioning in connection to the assault. He was in an interview room alone when he was found hanged. Okay. Now, they're supposed to check you for that type of stuff to make sure that doesn't happen. But what did officers say? That they found him suffering from, quote, injuries sustained by an object in his possession. Wonder what that could have been, right? Could have been a belt, could have been a shoelace, could have been a number of things. The police department's release read, police attempted life-saving measures, but they were unsuccessful. He died in police custody on April 2nd. Attorney Mel Davis, who is representing the family, said the assault may have occurred at a gas station, but no other details are known. The news conference came that they were fired when city officials came out and discussed that. City council didn't have any input on the termination, but the investigation is what prompted it. So I promised the family that there would be an investigation, says Van Johnson. Attorneys Francis echoed those sentiments. He said, today's a tough day. It's a tough day for the city of Savannah, for those who look up to the Savannah police. Tough day for the Harvey family. They're going to be considering a civil case. As far as the city knows, the case has not been turned over to the county district attorney's office yet. So they're going to be discussing whether to charge them criminally or not. Harvey's family begs for answers. They say it's just hard finding out what happened and how it happened. We've got so many questions. We've got some answers. We just want to know the truth. So here's the family here. And, they're just trying to get some answers. So we've got a little bit of activity there. Let's see what the questions look like. We've got I'm Not Gas says the police might have been a little bit jumpy, but Ocean City has cause for them to be jumpy. Shootings every weekend on the boardwalk. Oh, really? Yeah. Yeah, that's not good. I didn't know that. Yeah, I mean, I guess that sort of confirms my original thought that guy's lucky they didn't shoot him. Gosh, it's not good. We've got last question here on this segment before we move on. We've got Furby Slayer says, they said get down from what I hear, but notice the portly cop has a big grin on his face, vaping. That's all we need, more useless laws. Yeah, I mean, probably, one of the most offensive things that you could fathom these days is vaping on a boardwalk in the open air. Nobody around. Takes 6 cops to come out there and make an arrest for that. Don't you love justice in America? All right. So once again, go check out my Gumroad. Please, if you could, I would love a review. If you enjoyed the law enforcement interaction training, would love a review down there or a follow. And of course, do not forget to check out our law firm, the R&R Law Group. All of the information is down in the description below. So we've got one final segment before we wrap up on out of here. Normally, I have to kind of move quickly on Tuesdays, but we have a little bit extra time today. So we'll go through this because this is an interesting story. All right. So critical race theory. It's been a topic we spent a lot of time talking about on this channel, and it's been something that we've actually got some examples. We've gone through them. We've talked about what some people who are speaking to school boards have been identifying. We're talking about parents saying my kids are being taught this, and I've got a problem with it. And we've played clips of different things that are happening in our schools, in our military, in our healthcare system, and many other places around the country and the world. Now we have, though, Terry McAuliffe. You may remember this name from the Hillary Clinton, the Bill Clinton years. Terry McAuliffe was somebody who spent a lot of time in those circles, and now he's running for governor of Virginia. Well, when it comes to critical race theory, Mr. McAuliffe happens to think that CRT is nothing more than a right-wing conspiracy. This is what he said on Fox News or an interview that Fox News is covering. He says that the critical race theory concerns is nothing but a right-wing conspiracy. He says it's totally made up by Donald Trump and Glenn Youngkin, said McAuliffe. So he's the Virginia Democratic nominee for governor. He's dismissing it as a conspiracy. Audio obtained by Fox News, which was talking about his opponent and the former President Trump. He said, that's another right-wing conspiracy. He says, this is totally made up by Trump and Youngkin. That's who they are. It's a conspiracy theory. So let's listen in, see what he had to say.
So I, listened to what you're saying about education. I was just wondering, with all the Republicans are talking about, critical race theory, and they're making this huge deal about it, and it's all of the conversation in the news with Virginia. What are you going to say to all those people making education about that?
That's another right-wing conspiracy.
Okay.
This is totally made up by Donald Trump and Glenn Youngkin. This is who they are. It's a conspiracy theory.
Okay.
And you know what people want to know about? Why are we not paying our teachers? Why are we down 1,000 teachers today? Why? And why are 50% of our schools 50 years old? This is what people want to know about. So let's pay our teachers. Let's get our children access to broadband. Let's make sure we get at-risk children taken care of with pre-K. Those are what the Virginians care about.
All right, so that was Terry McAuliffe, and he said that the CRT stuff was a conspiracy theory, right? All made up by Trump, all made up by Youngkin and all this stuff. Now, I sort of recall when I was going through college, this was some time ago. I graduated in 2008 from Arizona State University, and then I went to law school. But when I was at ASU, I sort of remember that there were some interesting things happening there. This was some time ago, right? It's been a long time. And I was thinking back to my sort of time there. At ASU, there was this sort of the curriculum that you had to sort of achieve in order to graduate required that you had to go take these cultural classes or something like that, right? If you've been to college recently, maybe they did something like this where you had to take like a C class, right? That's a culture class, and you needed to take an A class, like it's an art class or whatever. And so I had to go through this. And when I was at ASU, I was somebody who was not particularly left-wing. Let me just leave it there. And so the idea that I had to go take these classes that just did not interest me in any way, shape, or form was sort of something that I put off. So I kind of waited until later in my college career before I had to take one of these classes. One of these classes was called Women in Other Cultures, and it was sort of one of the last classes I had to take. It fit in my schedule. One of the worst experiences of my entire life. And I'm being exaggerative here, but it was a bad educational experience for me. And I want to explain sort of why that was. I want to show you before we get into that something that is a little bit more recent. So I went to ASU, graduated in 2008, as I mentioned. That's far away, right? That's a while back. So I can't use my own evidence as an indication to show Terry McAuliffe that maybe in fact this is not a conspiracy. I could say, well, this is what I experienced, but that was like in 2007, 2008, a long time ago. But what about today? And so I was poking around, sort of reading through some critical race theory stuff. I follow Chris Rufo, and at some point, at some time, I came across this YouTube channel. Right, this is a YouTube channel over from Penn State. So I want to just show you around this briefly. So this says that there's a live stream here. This is Sociology 119. Okay, this is the class. And so they've got a YouTube channel for this class. And you'll notice that this was posted about 2 years ago, right? So this would have been in 2019, which is before COVID. So we're still having classes being taught there. And so what they do is they actually stream their lectures. So this is out of Penn State. This is Soc 19, and the name of the course is called Race and Ethnic Relations. It's being taught at Penn State University, spring 2019. So this is when people were still going to classes. If you have more questions, you can go to soc119.org. The name of the professor, the guy who teaches this, is this guy, and he goes by the name of Dr. Samuel Richards. Okay, he's an award-winning teacher. He's a sociologist at Penn State. He's the instructor of the largest race, gender, and cultural relations course in the United States. Over 760 students each semester, 25-year legacy. That course was the subject of an Emmy award-winning television broadcast called You Can't Say That. Okay, You Can't Say That. The course is currently streamed live to the world every Tuesday and Thursday. Sam's willingness to take risks and push new ideas is what led him to be named one of the 101 most dangerous professors in America. So I guess that's a good thing, or I don't know. I thought that dangerous people were dangerous. Like you had to be thrown off of the internet if you're dangerous, but this is a different type of dangerous. So, okay. Sam obtained his PhD from Rutgers. Focus on socioeconomic development in Africa and Latin America. Focuses on inequality. Currently focused on inequality stemming from racial and gender differences. And he works to develop programs that bridge cultural divides, arguing that empathy is the core of sociology. His radical experiment in empathy is one of the most widely viewed TED Talks online. Reached over 3 million people. In that talk, he walks the audience through how an average Iraqi citizen might experience the U.S. policies in their country. Okay. As the director, he's currently co-director of another NATO program. Primary goal is to offer people in conflict some sort of help. He is married to his wife, Lauren Mulvey. He's called the Parents of Radical Empathy. All right. So I want to show you this little scene from this guy's YouTube channel. And there's this, what we're looking at here, of course, is a black young man and a white young man sitting in front of a classroom of, 400 or 500 people. That's a big, big audience. And we know that he said that he has about 700 students. Maybe it's that. Maybe he has, teaches 2 classes, maybe 350, 400 kids here. So in my experience, when I was at ASU, I had something very similar like this happen to me in my Women's in Other Cultures class. And it was kind of a shocking thing that happened. I want to sort of share that with you now. But what happened is the professor called me up just like this. And in this class, I was one of about probably 40 to 60 women. Okay, it was almost all women. And I was one of 3 guys when the class started. And then by about the 3rd or 4th week in, the other 2 guys bailed. And I think I was the last guy in the entire class. And you might say that's a pretty good thing if you're going to be in a classroom full of women, but it wasn't worth the brutal needles in my ears on a daily basis from this professor who was talking about on a regular basis how awful men are. Okay. And is literally that men are responsible for everything that is wrong with the world. So I had to sit there and just deal with that for a semester because I needed that stupid credit, right? I have no interest in women in other cultures. I love women. I love other cultures, but I don't have an interest in that class being taught by some lunatic professor who wants to, belittle men for 90 minutes every day. I wasn't interested in that. I had other visions for my life, but ASU told me that I needed that. They said, no, we don't think you're well-rounded enough. You need some more culture. You need to think like we do. And because you're a white male, you have to go do these things. And we think that you are sort of incomplete unless you have it. So, okay, fine. I went and I did it. Don't think that it changed anything other than made me very resentful towards this particular professor. And I'll tell you why. So what she did is the same thing, right? She called us up in front of the classroom like this. So she called me up and she called another woman up, another gal, college gal. And what she did is she stood us right next to each other, just like this guy's doing with these 2 people. Now, he's doing it here with race. So you're going to see him start to sort of, I would say borderline attack these 2 kids by putting them in front of a whole audience like this and asking them some very, very difficult questions in front of everybody. He's going to ask them for their full names, okay, first and last name. This is on his channel, so he's outing them publicly, and he's going to sort of make them feel badly before he finishes the conversation. Now, in my situation, he's doing this between a white kid and a black kid. In my situation, she did it between me and another woman. And I am not a tall guy specifically, but I do like to lift weights, and so I sort of have girth to me, right? I'm sort of wide, sort of like a bulldog to some degree. Faith knows what I'm talking about. Hi, Faith. All right, so that's kind of how I'm sort of built, right? I'm short and stocky. So this other girl was not like that at all. And she picked us out specifically. She picked me. She picked this girl. She brought us both up to the front of the class in front of all these people. And she went through both of our bodies, top to bottom. And I'm not kidding you. And she compared and contrasted both of these things. And the entire time she was talking about sort of my physical traits and how sort of privileged I was to be a man who was muscular. And she talked about my physical power over this woman. And it was a very belittling conversation for both of us. Okay. I felt just terrible and she felt terrible. And it was one of the most uncomfortable things that we've ever been through. And after the class, we went through, I actually talked to her and we both just kind of like, what was that? Because she was making it into this thing like, because I lift weights, because I am physically fit, I am sort of, playing into this toxic male identity. And that toxic male identity is giving me all of these privileges in life that open all these doors for me that are not going to be open for this young gal. And I was sitting here going, what the hell are you talking about? I go, you don't know this girl and you don't know anything about her, right? She's probably as powerful as hell. She turned out to be pretty great, but she's, full of energy, full of life, very intelligent, a lot of different things. We look physically different, but so what, right? She was bringing us up in front of the class and telling us about ourselves. Like you're a white guy with muscles and, you like to exercise a lot. That's basically all I did in college was, drink alcohol and lift weights and then just sleep through the classes because it was such a drag. But it was, it was something that it was very, very condescending to both of us. And, I didn't feel like I knew anything more about women. I didn't feel like I had any more empathy for women. I felt very degraded. She felt very degraded. I think the entire class felt put off by this, and there was no progress that was being made at all. I actually, that stuck with me more than any other, really any other experience in college, and not in a good way, right? It was very, very belittling. It was very condescending. And she may say, and it wasn't just me, right? It was the other gal too. And I think it was the rest of the classroom, quite frankly. Now that was early on, like that was 2008, 2007-ish. And so this has changed pretty dramatically in the years that have elapsed since then, but it's still going on. And for those of you who maybe have not been in college in some time, or, plan not to go to college, which I probably wouldn't go again if I could, but it would be something, this is what's happening. So let's take a look here. You're going to watch the professor do the same thing. Okay, I went through this. Classroom wasn't exactly this big, but it was very similar to this. And I feel really badly for both of these kids. I feel bad for these students. I think this professor has a lot of probably narcissistic tendencies, or something's going on with him to have to abuse people like this. But let's listen in.
How is it to know that you're walking around with that kind of benefit, that kind of affirmative action?
Well, I don't want to. I guess this could be all tied into the idea of white privilege and everything, and I guess it's just I don't think it should be true. It's crazy. I don't know. I don't really know what to think of it, but it is what it. I don't know. I don't want to say it is what it is, but it doesn't seem like the statistic. It's not changing. It's I don't know.
So it's confusing.
Yeah, it's confusing.
It shouldn't be that way.
Yeah.
And yet it is that way.
Yeah.
And yet when you get your degree, when they hang you your degree, bro, here's Tim. Here's your Timothy. What's your last name? Eimer. So they're going to call your name out, and you're going to walk across the stage, and it's going to be Timothy Eimer. And you're going to walk across the stage, and you're going to shake a hand. Here, you take that. You're going to shake the hand, and then you're going to get the degree. You're going to yeah. And your parents are going to cheer or whatever, and you're going to have this degree. And you're going to think, oh, yeah, I fully earned the degree. I got it. And I deserve this, and I deserve everything that comes to it. Yeah, well, you know what? What's your last name, bro? Davis. Dude, Miles Davis? Oh. Same thing. Miles Davis. And Miles is going to walk across the stage, and he's going to have the same thing. He's going to get the degree and shake a hand and go yeah, and his family's going to cheer. And everyone's going to be you're going to be at graduation, and you're going to assume that these two guys are equal, and they're fucking not equal. It's not, we are not there, my friends. We are not there.
All right, so I don't even know what really his point is on that. We're not equal. I don't know if anybody's saying that is true. Are we all saying that everything in America is perfect and that we're all equal, or what is he saying, that the white kid's degree is not as good as the black kid's degree, or the black kid's degree is not equal to the white kid's degree? I don't know what he's actually talking about, but I remember when I watched that, I remember that experience that I had. I thought it was very offensive. I think it doesn't really help much of anything. Are those two guys going to go after, leave the classroom, and they're going to go, hey man, you're right. We're actually not equal, and our degrees don't actually match up. And so let's solve racial issues here. Is this going to solve more racial problems, or is this going to just sort of exacerbate them? Because that's what it feels like to me, right? What he told that black kid right there is that no matter what you do, you're not going to be equal to this guy right here because he's white. You are a permanent victim. You will never amount to what he amounts to because we're not there yet, whatever that means. So I'm not real sure what he wants to do to fix this or what the rest of his garbage course looks like, but it is happening in our schools. So I don't know what Terry McAuliffe is talking about, but that is the reality, right? We're talking about these issues on a regular basis. They're sort of splitting people down the middle. They're saying you're a white kid, you're a black kid, and we're going to put you in front of the stage, and we're going to make you just hash these issues out in front of everybody, and you're going to out yourself. And this is part of progress in America now. I guess this is the conversation that we all should be having so that we're less racist. I guess by victimizing certain demographics. By teaching an ideology that makes sure that a certain segment of our country knows that they are unequal, knows that they will never amount to equality unless we can do something about this. That's a tall order. You're telling me that we have to, that young black kid is going to have to sort of reform all of America, change all of the institutions throughout the entire country before he gets a shot at equality? It's a pretty tall order. Seems like it might be depressing for somebody in that position. Somebody might be asking themselves, maybe they don't have the bandwidth, the capacity to go out there and achieve those things, versus telling somebody, listen, the world may be not actually fair. Okay, there may be racists out there. There may be certain privileges that some people have. Okay, I talked about my stockiness. Okay, that might be a privilege to some people. Other people might consider height to be a privilege. I am not, height privileged, for example. We all have different characteristics about our lives that we have to deal with on a regular basis. Not everything is going to be equitable all the time. You can't manage that. So I think personally, the better approach, I was not somebody who was born with a silver spoon in my hand. If I would have been approached by somebody and said, sorry, Rob, life sucks. Everybody in the world is out to get you. You are a perpetual victim. You just worked hard for a degree. Doesn't really matter though, because that other guy has a better starting point in life. You can't do anything because he started ahead of you. And I guess my recourse would be, well, we got to change the system, right? Don't we? Don't we, Professor? What should we do? Well, we got to keep talking about this. We got to keep talking about CRT. We got to go out there and fight for a cause. We got to go join this movement or that movement in order to go effectuate social change. Meanwhile, I have to live my life for the next couple decades as an oppressed victim who can't accomplish anything on my own because society is so oriented against me. Not a good way to teach anybody. Okay, I wouldn't want to be taught that way. The incentive structure is all wrong. Rather than encouraging people to go out there and make something of themselves, we tell people, what's the point? There's nothing you can do for yourself because society is so oriented against you that any attempts at progress are futile. That's that professor. And he's getting, accolades and accommodations all over the place for having a hard conversation with people, right? You have to have a hard conversation. You have to have these little struggle sessions in order for progress to be made. I don't buy it for a second. I think it's counterproductive. I think it is reversing the proper role of incentives in our society. And guess what, folks? I think the kids who are going through this and the ones who are soaking it up and lapping it up and the parents are patting them on the backs for it, they're all going to be at a disadvantage for the rest of their lives. And it's a sad thing. I don't have kids, but man, I would be really rethinking a lot of this. Now, as hot and as heated as I can get over that story, there are some other stories that just ring the bell the right way and make you smile ear to ear. I've been sort of ranting about the CRT stuff for some time because I think it is a big part of the problem. We have a lot of issues here in America, but we are educating kids to be sort of out of alignment with, I think, are the principles of success. The stuff that makes people happy, healthy, and free are being educated out of our systems and replaced with an idea that we're all oppressors that are sort of waging war on the different victim demographic groups throughout America. So one is going to be successful, one is not. Now, I've been pointing this out for some time here. Terry McAuliffe says that this stuff is a conspiracy theory. Every now and then you see that story that just goes, oh yeah, we're talking about that. This one is the case. So when we're talking about our woke schools, who better to sort of give us an idea about how bad it can get than somebody who used to go to school in North Korea? Well, we have somebody. We actually have a North Korean defector. Her name is Yeonmi Park. Well, what does she have to say? She says that the schools in America are not so good. She slams the schools, calling them woke. Who is this woman? She's a North Korean defector. She said she viewed the U.S. as a country of free thought and free speech until she went to college here. Yeonmi Park attended Columbia University, was immediately struck by what she viewed as anti-Western sentiment and a focus on political correctness that had her thinking, quote, even North Korea isn't this nuts. Do you see what I'm talking about? It's just too good of a story. Even North Korea is not as nuts as Columbia University. I always suspected that, but now we know. We got from Yeonmi Park, she says, I was expecting that I was paying this fortune all the time and energy to learn how to think, but they are forcing you to think the way they want you to think. She says, I realized, wow, this is insane. I thought America was different, but I saw so many similarities to what I saw in North Korea that I started worrying. She fled North Korea at age 13 in a voyage that took her and her family some time to travel to China, then South Korea before she went to school in New York. Her professors gave students, quote, trigger warnings, sharing the wording from readings in advance so people could opt out of reading or even sitting in class during discussions. So trigger warnings. I've told you about this, guys. I've said this here on this channel. If you go into Clubhouse, which is that app that we use now, Twitter has Spaces, go try to find one of these woke rooms and pick a topic about, environmental justice discussion, June 21. Go into that room and just see how they operate. Trigger warnings. And here in Colombia, apparently, you can just decide not to read something. You just say, I don't like that topic. It's offensive to me because it reminds me of my father. Okay, so you don't have to read that. It was a chapter on macroeconomics and supply chains. But yeah, if that triggers some bad memories of your father, don't read that there, Johnny. You can be fine. Come back to class after you've had your chai latte, and we'll see you back there on Wednesday. So going to Colombia, the first thing that she learned was, quote, safe space. Every problem they explained us is because of white men, they said. Some of the discussions of white privilege reminded her of the caste system in her own native country where people were categorized based on their ancestors. See what's happening here? We just played a clip of it happening in a real classroom. In one class, a teacher discussing Western civilization asked students if they had a problem with the name of the topic. Most students raised their hands. Some, she said, mentioned the issues with colonial slant of the discussion. And classes often began with professors asking students their preferred pronouns, with the use of, quote, they becoming scary as she feared being socially penalized for not being inclusive enough with her vocabulary. She says, English is my third language. It's very hard for me to say he and she, and sometimes I misuse them. Okay. She told Fox that she was also chided for saying she enjoyed the writings of Jane Austen. Said, I love those books. I thought it was a good thing. Then she said, do you know those writers had a colonial mindset? They were racist and bigots, and they subconsciously are brainwashing you. Park said North Korea students were constantly informed about the American bastard. I thought North Koreans were the only people who hated Americans, but turns out there are a lot of people hating this country in this country, she told the Post. Which just makes me just want to do a cartwheel right now. Cancel culture and shouting down opposing voices is becoming an issue of self-censorship. Park, who chronicled her escape from North Korea and life in the repressive regime, she wrote a memoir in 2015 titled In Order to Live, said Americans seem willing to give their rights away, not realizing they may never come back. She should run for office for something. Voluntarily, these people are censoring each other, silencing each other, no force behind it. Other times in history, there's a military coup d'etat, like a force comes in, taking your rights away and silencing you. But this country is choosing to be silenced, choosing to give their rights away. Park said that what a country could become with rights and discourse, she knows what that's like when they're stripped away. She said North Korea was pretty insane. Like the first thing my mom taught me was don't even whisper. The birds and mice could hear me. She told me the most dangerous thing that I had on my body was my tongue. So I knew how dangerous it was to say the wrong things in a country. Park grew up in the last Stalinist dictatorship, witnessed people dying from starvation, said Americans are obsessed with oppression, even though there was not much oppression they've witnessed firsthand. She said, this is completely nuts. This is unbelievable. I don't know why people are collectively going crazy like this or together at the same time. Okay, and I talked about this yesterday, right? Sort of this idea that people are just bored. So they're just going to go out there and fight for a cause or something. Now, I'm not saying that. There are a lot of good causes, a lot of people doing a lot of good things for the right reasons. But a lot of people who sort of like never been oppressed, they've been born with a silver spoon in their mouths, and they're going to Columbia of all places, and they've been handed everything, most of them, or a lot of them, right? It's an Ivy League. Isn't Columbia an Ivy League, right? It's one of the most prestigious schools in the country. So we have a bunch of complainers there. This woman goes there and says all they're doing is complaining about white men and oppression. She said the situation in North Korea is one thing because the people don't have access to the internet. They have limited exposure to the globe, but students here have everything. She said that as a child, she had thought dictator Kim Jong-un was starving and overworked until she was in North Korea and was shown pictures that show he was large compared to the other people who looked thin and hungry. It's what it does when you're brainwashed. She says in some ways the U.S. are brainwashed. Even though there's evidence so clearly in front of their eyes, they can't see it. Yeah, a lot of Americans don't know what is coming down the line. And that's why we're all here together, slamming our fist down to make sure that we can sound the alarm. Good news, though, we've got some activity in Congress. Congress is now our federal Congress. We've been talking about a lot of the activity from the states. And we've talked about the concept that the states can be little individual laboratories of democracy. I think Sandra Day O'Connor coined that phrase. And the idea is that they can sort of solve their own problems. And I like that idea a lot. The idea that, things that are local problems are solved locally. If you have a school that you want to send your kid to, should have the choice to do that. If the government's going to be funding education, in my opinion, it should be funding choice, allowing you to pick what school to go to, rather than having a government mandate that comes out and says no critical race theory. Or conversely, which is probably going to happen at some point, some other school or some other state or city that comes out and mandates CRT, right? We're going to see this battle unfold before our very eyes, and we're already seeing it right now. 1619 Project is, sort of well underway in New York and some other places, is my understanding. And now we're seeing our federal government is sort of springing into action. We have Representative Ken Buck over from Colorado. He reintroduced a bill in the House of Representatives that's going to ban federal funds from going to a school curriculum that teaches the 1619 Project. So we've got Buck alongside House colleague. We've got Rick Allen from Georgia, Tom Cotton, Senator from Arkansas. They reintroduced this bill called the Saving American History Act. It's going to ban federal funds from being used to teach the project or school districts. The 1619 Project claims, if you're not familiar with that America's defining year was not when our nation was founded in 1776, but rather when the first slave ship arrived on the shores in 1619. Okay, so they're changing the birth of America's date there. Buck slammed critical race theory in the release, saying the ideology does not belong in schools. That kids should not be treated, that they're going to be treated, taught that they're treated differently by race. Critical race theory is dangerous, anti-American, has no place in our schools, he said. Allen torched the 1619 Project as something that was trying to, quote, indoctrinate students, saying that the United States is an evil country, warned against teaching revisionist history in the classroom. So the legislation is going to try to keep federal dollars out of there. And then we have Cotton gave his own warning. He said activists in schools want to teach our kids to hate America, 1619 Project. So a lot of people here are sort of opposing what Terry McAuliffe was saying at the beginning. Arkansas Republicans also recently introduced legislation to ban teaching of CRT. We've been talking a lot about this, right? I think Iowa did it. And I think, I can't remember the other states. A lot of states are sort of, the dominoes are falling, as it were, and we're starting to see some response. Parents are sick of this. And I'd be very curious, even the parents who are sort of in favor of some of this conversation, I'd be very curious if they would send their kids to some of these same teachings. Would a woke parent really be okay with a professor calling him up in front of the classrooms and scolding their white daughter about how much privilege she has in front of 300 people? I'm not so sure that most parents would say, man, that sounds like a really formative experience. Sounds like an amazing education. I'm happy paying $50,000 a year for that. Yeah, right. Tuberville now, another senator. He joins 6 other Republican senators in support of a bill that would prohibit federal funds. So we've got senators and Republicans now. He says, when done right, education is the key to freedom. U.S. government should not spend a single taxpayer dollar to teach children to dislike their country. So he's co-sponsoring this thing, and we're going to see if it goes anywhere. Last month, Alabama Attorney General Marshall and 19 other state attorney generals, they wrote the federal education secretary. They oppose critical race theory, and Tuberville and many others are all joining in on it, right? The Saving American History Act. So as we know, the Republicans don't control anything in Congress right now. They don't control the House of Representatives. They don't control the Senate. Currently, the Democrats do. It's a 50-50 split, but the Democrats have Kamala Harris. So they've got her in the bag. So are the Republicans going to be able to move this through? No, absolutely not. But we got midterms coming up here pretty soon, don't we? 2022. We'll see if the balance of power changes a little bit. Regardless, is Joe Biden going to sign this into law? No, of course not. So while it's a good idea, I think that they're moving in this direction, at least bringing some more attention to this. They're going to use this more or less, I think, as a political tool more than an actual attempt to pass it is where we're at. So let's take some questions over from watchingthewatchers.locals.com. We've got I'm Not Gas in the house. As someone who went to uni around the same time as you, I went to a class on history of South Africa. The teacher was telling me how brutal the murder of a tourist activist and the subsequent pardoning story of Amy Beale was actually a good thing and justified because they were expressing their grievances against colonial oppressors. That turned me from your average college lefty to the right, right? Yeah. I know, man. It was my experience too. Honestly, I didn't have much interest in the topic, of women in other cultures. I like the idea of learning about other cultures. I like to travel in other cultures. I like learning about a lot of different things. And I'm not somebody who wants to encourage any type of discrimination. I love the idea that we all, have equal opportunities, but I don't like the concept of forced, mandatory, equitable outcomes. Equal opportunities, okay. Equal outcomes is communist Marxist garbage. And, we're slowly starting to trend that direction, I think. And, I had a very similar experience to your experience. I went from somebody who wasn't particularly interested in that topic to somebody who is now insulted and resentful towards that topic. And that woman, I still remember, I can picture her in my face. I couldn't believe that she did this in front of everybody without any expectations. I was just sort of a bumbling college student, didn't care about anything, just kind of working my way through. I knew what I needed to do. Women in other cultures class, I was probably asleep at the wheel, calls me up and actually belittles me, like muscle group by muscle group. And I'm pretty sure she was like touching me, like touch the shoulders, look at the shoulders and all this stuff, and like condescending, and then went over to the woman and did it to her, right? Look how small she is. Look how tiny her shoulders are. Look at her hips, right? A little bit bigger for birthing and all, like in front of the whole class. And then talked about what a toxic male I was. Okay. Don't know. Now, I didn't pay for that education, but all right. Want to Know says, had a CRT rally in Portland last Saturday. 5 teachers have kids scream, teach the truth. About 20 bystanders watched it numerous times. Mommies protesting, carrying signs in front of schools, never covered at all. Those crowds, 20 to 50 people, a lot at the schools. A CRT rally, 5 teachers have kids scream, teach the truth. 20 bystanders watched it. Yeah, teachers or parents are not happy about this. Todd Trout says, this is just awful. No professor should ever demean someone like that. If that happened to my son, I would have to be restrained from saying something. Yeah. I feel that same way. I tend not to think that I'm too much of an overreactionary or somebody that just gets mad about, not good stuff. But I mean, if a professor is sort of scolding your kid in front of a classroom, I think that is a problem. We have E. Dantes says, that professor is a moron. Yes, that was a performance with a captive student who would not express his opinion if he wanted to. No matter what he said, he was captive to however that professor wanted to frame this charade, right? Exactly right. Yeah, the professor knew what he was doing. When I see professors like that, it always reminds me of somebody who is doing more of a performance, right? It's more about them. That's why I said kind of like a narcissist, right? Almost narcissistic. He wants to be the center of attention. He's done that little shtick, 100 times. He's dealing with college students who are not particularly well equipped to go head to head with him in an intellectual battle, okay? These are college kids. He has a major advantage. So it'd be like bringing up like an 8-year-old in a karate competition and saying, Rob, go ahead now. You verse the 8-year-old. Let's see how this goes. I probably would win. Probably. I don't know. I don't know what the 8-year-old is, but probably. Okay. So it's like this professor doing that and then sort of patting himself on the back for making some very progressive points about how everything is not equal, which was anybody saying that things are equal? Like you're making an argument on a premise that nobody's agreeing with you on. We all we all know that we have different circumstances in life. Nobody's trying to argue that point. So why are you trying to make that point? Okay. Boxy Punk Chick says, didn't Harvard, Penn State, and many other universities have lawsuits for discrimination, which actually ended up creating discrimination? It has allowed many people who were a minority with low test scores to get in classes, while the other kids who had the qualifications are forced to give their seats up. Sometimes anti-discrimination creates discrimination. Yeah, it's because it's I think it's much more actually currently sort of trending towards active discrimination. It's not even about, it's sort of, if you are not having a conversation about discrimination, about racism, if you're not talking about race, if you're engaged in anything with a person of a different race and you're not actively considering race as a variable in that equation, then you are a racist. That's the whole concept of systemic racist. Everything has racism sort of inherently baked into the system. So if you are not actively addressing racism, then you are actively being racist. The only way to address your own inherent racism is by calling it out, by making sure that you're aware of it so that you can actively act against it. Because as we know from the medical doctor, Dr. Moss says that we're parasitic. I don't know about everybody else, but me personally, as a white person, parasitic malignant condition that I have. So if that's the only way that we can have a conversation, we really can't have a conversation, can we? And this professor knows that he has an unfair advantage, and he did that not for the student's education. He did that for his own glory. He wants to grow his YouTube channel, wants to make himself to be this social justice warrior, and in the meantime, he's going to be wrecking the minds of kids who are all going to be delegated this perverse incentive structure that's going to be programmed into their brain, that the only way that they can succeed in America is if they are the ultimate victim, so that they can get the equity that they're being promised by this professor and all of these politicians who will never, ever be able to make due on that promise. Are you kidding me? They're going to make equitable, equity across this country. Will never happen. So if there's a whole contingency of college students who are saying that, oh, we're entitled to equity and we're entitled to certain things in life because of our demographic condition as we were birthed into this country, and we expect society to give that to us, they're going to be waiting for some time. Okay, don't hold your breath on that. It's not because I don't want people to have good things or what's fair to them. It's because it's not humanly possible, at least now, to make sure that everybody is equal on everything. So what do we do as a society if we can't achieve that? If we can't centrally plan so that our government can make sure that everybody gets the same number of items all the time, right? Which is communism. We've tried it in our country. We've tried it in our world. Has never worked out well. They're talking about bringing that back now, and it's not possible. It doesn't work. So if you're training students to operate in that system, they're going to be at a serious disadvantage, and they're going to recognize it soon. That professor, he's just giving those speeches for his own vanity, his own glory. Those kids now are the ones who are ultimately going to suffer. All right, so we've got Doodle Doo in the house. Says, so what about the 6'10 black graduate who gets drafted into the NBA and makes millions over the white kid who's 5'9, also a talented basketball player, but who will never be drafted and may end up working at a boring, low-paying job? Why don't we accuse the NBA of being racist then? That clip you showed of that professor was just proof that poison and indoctrination is what is being taught in our universities. Yeah, and that was just 2 minutes, right? That guy has a whole channel with all of the classes on there. So I'm sure you can find a lot more disgusting concepts in there. Now, we all have different things that we have in life. We have different privileges. You can have male privilege, you can have female privilege, you can have a children privilege, adult privilege, all sorts of privileges. So if we want to start having that conversation, I guess then if that's the standard to apply, maybe they should apply it equally. But that's not the point. The point is not to engage in that garbage conversation because it's not useful. And it's a lose-lose proposition. It's very, very effective because it's very circular. Anytime you try to put up your defenses to rebut any critical race theory arguments, they use one of their little Jedi mind tricks to call it white privilege or white flight or white fragility or whatever. You don't have the stones to deal with your own racism, and they can win every argument that way. So it's, in my opinion, it's not even worth really dealing with them. That professor, teach his class, give the students the choice. If the state is going to subsidize college education, give that as a voucher to those students, and let's let the schools compete. I would love to see a school for entrepreneurship, for financial literacy, for people to go out there and sort of learn a trade, right? To go do something meaningful, not sit in these classrooms like I did, learning about women in other cultures while some lunatic professor scolds and critiques my entire body from top to bottom and then flips around and does it to the girl standing right next to me. Not appropriate, not a good education, didn't get anything out of that, but here we are. Still here. Now it's getting progressively worse based on what I'm seeing out here on some of these news stories, but we'll see where it goes. All right, great questions. All of those came over from watching thewatchers.locals.com. Really appreciate all your support. That's our community where we're slowly, brick by brick, building a new supply chain away from big tech. We're going more towards new ecosystems that are not beholden to some of the old power structures that exist. And I also want to invite you to take a look at my Gumroad. This is my new sort of portal for some of the new offerings that I have out there. Law enforcement interaction training was something we did this past weekend. It was a ton of fun. We had an actual officer who was on there, a retired officer who sort of weighed in on the training. So you can download that. If you're a local supporter, make sure you check locals before you purchase anything. There's some good stuff over there. Otherwise, this one's $19. Existence Systems is my personal productivity system. If you're a lawyer, check out the Gruler method. If you're an attorney or somebody who's a legal professional, check those out. I would really appreciate a follow if you check out gumroad.com/Robert Gruler or click this QR code. Drop an email in there and you'll get updates. I've got a lot of other courses that I'm working on. I've got all the chapters of the book that I wrote. I've got a mitigation course that I want to put together. I've got a Bitcoin and a crypto course. that I want to put together for my friends and family, so to sort of help them get inclined to more of a sort of a decentralized, independent financial system. So got a lot of stuff. I would really appreciate a follow over there and a review. If you've checked out any of the content and you liked it, I would love a 5-star review from you. We also have our law firm, which is where we are really making a difference in people's lives. We talk a lot here on the channel about politics. We have fun. We kind of joke. Sometimes we get serious, and we try to learn something every day and experiment with some of the concepts that are being kicked around out there. But every day at our firm, we have boots on the ground. We're doing the hard work in and out of the court systems. We love to help good people facing criminal charges. And so if you happen to know anybody that needs some help, have them give us a call. The phone number down there for a free case evaluation is 480-787-0394. They can click that QR code and, of course, check out our website. Want to thank everybody who came over to Locals. Number one, we got Cheese Will is here. At Cheese Will, not Cheese Wheel. Cheese Will. Welcome, Will. Appreciate you being here. Great questions came over from watchingthewatchers.locals.com, which is our community platform down here. Want to welcome, thank you, all of you. Great questions. Had a lot of fun today. Some very interesting topics, a little bit of heavy lifting around these parts, but I think it was well worth it. If you do subscribe over at Locals, you can get some pretty good stuff. Free copy of my book down there in the bottom left, Beginning to Winning. It is a free PDF you can download. You also get a copy of the slides if you want to download those. Copy of my impeachment party templates. My existence system document is available over at Locals. You can also buy the course for $8.88 at Gumroad. We share links throughout the day. There's a lot of great people over there. We have a monthly meetup. Pin this on your calendar, June 26th. So if you remember, at Locals, we're going to get together, hang out for about an hour, do some live Q&A with everybody there. We did this last time. I tried to have sort of a framework and a structure for it. Didn't work out real well, but we are going to just do some Q&A. So if you have some questions that you want to ask of the show, if you have some comments, if you have anything that you want to nudge the show in a different direction, that's a good time to do that. We're going to do it live. Cameras are optional, on or off if you want. June 26th, 7 to 8 p.m. Eastern Time. And that is it, my friends. As I already mentioned, I'm a criminal defense lawyer at the R&R Law Group, so we would love a referral if you know anybody in our state that needs some help. We offer free case evaluations. And that is it for me, my friends. It's been a long show, but I really enjoyed it. Thank you for all your comments, your contributions to the program. You make things live and fun, and I do appreciate it. So we're going to be back here same time, same place tomorrow for yet another show. 4 p.m. Arizona time, 5 p.m. Mountain, 6 p.m. Central, 7 p.m. on that East Coast for that one Florida man out there. Everybody else, stay well, be healthy, have a nice dinner, and I will see you right back here tomorrow. Bye-bye.